Amy Billig was born on January 9, 1957, in Oyster Bay, New York City. Her parents, Ned Solomon and Susan Billig, had endured several miscarriages before her birth, making her their miracle child. A year later, on February 14, 1958, they welcomed their son, Josh. When Amy was 11 and Josh was 10, the family moved from New York to South Florida because of concerns about the city's high crime rate. They attended private schools, while their parents ran an art studio near Commodore Plaza. Amy is a gentle, friendly girl who embodies the free spirit of the 1970s. She loved music, played the flute, guitar, and often sang, and was a devout Jew. Amy loved to read, write, and often jotted down poems in her notebook. She loved animals, was a vegetarian, and dreamed of becoming an actress. She often hitchhiked, a common and generally accepted practice at the time. By early 1974, Amy was preparing to graduate from Adelphi Academy of Coral Gables on March 31, looking forward to pursuing her acting dream. But weeks before graduation, she disappeared without a trace, leaving her Coconut Grove community in shock. On Tuesday, March 5, 1974, Amy came home from school and made plans to meet friends later that day, plans she would never keep. She called her father's art studio to ask for money for lunch at Peacock Park. Her father, Ned, agreed, and she began walking to the store, less than a mile away. Dressed in a denim skirt, cork platform shoes, and carrying her camera, she chose to hitchhike there, something considered normal back then. She never arrived. When Amy didn't come home that evening, her mother Susan and younger brother Josh became worried. When her father said she had never been to the store, their concern turned to fear. Susan called Amy's friends and was alarmed to learn Amy had never met them for lunch. The family contacted the police, who initially told her not to worry and to call back if Amy didn't return by morning, by 6 a.m. The next day, March 6, Susan called the police again in panic, and an official search began. Investigators canvassed the area and soon discovered a possible lead. Witnesses reported seeing Amy getting into a white van near Coconut Grove that afternoon. On March 18, 13 days after Amy vanished, a college student hitchhiking near the Wildwood exit of Florida's Turnpike, about 250 miles from Miami, found her camera discarded in the grass. The camera was returned to the police, and the family confirmed it belonged to Amy. After developing the film, investigators found most photos unusable. But two caught their attention. They showed a light-colored, possibly white pickup truck parked in front of a house covered in vines. This matched witness accounts of Amy entering a white van the day she disappeared. However, detectives couldn't verify when or where the photos were taken. With no address, license plate, or other identifying details, the trail went cold. Desperate to find out the truth, Amy's mother, Susan, urged the police to search her daughter's room for fingerprints, believing that the kidnapper might be someone Amy knew. Initially, the police dismissed the idea, assuming that Amy had simply run away. But as time went on, it became clear she hadn't left on her own. Someone had likely taken her. When the police finally agreed to check Amy's room for fingerprints, all traces had been wiped away by the hot, humid Florida weather. It was a serious mistake and a lost chance to uncover vital clues about Amy's disappearance. Refusing to lose hope, Susan started her own investigation and hired a private detective. She and her husband, Ned, worked to spread the word, doing everything they could to let people know Amy was missing. They created posters in English and Spanish, organized a vigil in Amy's honor, and went door to door asking neighbors for any information. Susan also called the Miami Police Department almost every day for updates. In quiet moments, she would sit in Amy's room, filled with longing and trying to feel close to her daughter. One day, while in Amy's room, Susan happened to flip through her daughter's notebook and made a disturbing discovery. In an entry written 6 weeks before disappearing, Amy mentioned that she and a boy named Hank planned to go to South America, a plan she described as crazy. The revelation deeply unsettled Susan. Amy had always been open with her family, especially with her mother, sharing almost everything. So why had she never mentioned Hank or this strange plan to travel abroad? The silence was all the more ominous. And it would later become a key part of the case. 16 days after Amy vanished, Susan received a chilling call from twin brothers, Charles and Lawrence Glasser, both 16 years old. They claimed to be holding Amy hostage and demanded $30,000 in ransom. Police tracked down Charles and Lawrence and arrested them on March 22 at the Fontainebleau Hotel. Susan hoped this would be a breakthrough that would reunite her with Amy. But it turned out to be a hoax. They had never kidnapped Amy. Both Charles and Lawrence were charged with extortion and pleaded guilty. After that incident, Susan continued to receive false calls and tips, but she clung to every little clue. Yet some leads seemed believable. Many suggested that Amy had been kidnapped by a biker gang, possibly the Outlaws or the Pagans, both with reputations for abducting women. Witnesses even claimed to have seen Amy riding on the back of a motorcycle with a gang member on the day she disappeared. This theory gained traction. In the 1970s, the Outlaws and the Pagans were active in Coconut Grove, and people feared Amy had been taken by one of them. Following these leads, Susan eventually traveled to a convenience store near Orlando. When shown Amy's picture, the manager immediately recognized her. A girl matching Amy's description entered the store with 2 men who looked like motorcyclists and bought a can of vegetable soup, a detail that caught Susan's attention because Amy was a vegetarian. The manager added that the girl barely spoke, and the men referred to her as mute, sometimes calling her Mellow Cheryl. This deepened Susan's belief in the biker gang theory. Determined to find the truth, she began speaking directly with gang members, searching for any hint that could lead her to Amy. In January 1976, a former biker named Paul approached Susan, claiming he had information about her daughter. He invited her to his home, where he admitted that during his time in the gang, he had owned Amy. Paul described her as quiet, submissive, and nearly mute, just as others had said. According to him, Amy was still alive but held captive by the gang. Susan was skeptical, so she asked Paul to describe something unique about Amy's appearance. His answer shocked her. He accurately mentioned a scar on Amy's stomach, a detail only Susan knew and had never shared publicly. The revelation convinced her that Paul was telling the truth. Soon after, he called again, claiming that Amy was being held at a violent biker bar in Tulsa, a notoriously dangerous place. Despite the danger, Susan was ready to do anything to rescue her daughter. When she met Paul at the bar, chaos broke out. Before she knew what was happening, another cyclist escorted her out and put her in a waiting taxi to take her back to the hotel. Soon after, Paul contacted Susan again through her lawyer. This time, he claimed that Amy was in Seattle. Despite recently suffering a heart attack, Susan refused to rest. She immediately traveled there, determined to continue searching for her daughter. Unfortunately, all her efforts were in vain. The young girls she met were not Amy. It was never clear whether these tips were real leads or deliberate attempts to torment Susan. There's still the possibility that Amy was kidnapped by a biker gang, and Paul may have genuinely been trying to help Susan with the little information he had. Then, in late 1992, Susan was approached by Virginia Schneider, a private investigator working on a different case. Schneider had been collaborating with a detective in England who shared a curious report. A heavily tattooed man, looking like a biker, had been seen at a post office in Falmouth, England, with a young woman. When asked about her, he said she was a deaf American from Oyster Bay. This caught Susan's attention, as Amy had been born in Oyster Bay. It was striking that every claimed sighting described the young woman the same way. Unfortunately, after a year, this lead went cold when the English investigator passed away, leaving no further information about Amy's whereabouts. In the following years, disturbing details began to surface. In 1997, Paul's wife told police that before his death, Paul had confessed the truth: the biker gang was responsible for Amy's disappearance, and according to him, they had killed her. Paul reportedly admitted that Amy was abused by some biker gangs at a pagan gang party in the Everglades. She had resisted and cursed at them. The gang hadn't originally planned to kill her, but when she continued to fight back, they reportedly drugged her to force compliance. This banned substance accidentally caused an overdose, leading to death. According to Paul, the bikers disposed of Amy's body in a nearby swamp filled with snakes, explaining why she was never found. However, it is also possible that this entire story was fabricated and that Paul's wife was seeking attention from the media. For Susan, hearing such claims was devastating. Each new revelation only deepened her pain, but she refused to give up hope that Amy might still be alive. Just a few months after Amy disappeared, while Susan was delving into the dangerous world of biker gangs searching for her daughter, she began receiving disturbing phone calls. Sometimes there was only silence. Other times, she heard nothing but a man's heavy breathing. Police were never able to identify who was calling. Most of the calls came from scattered payphones, and without security cameras nearby, tracking the caller was nearly impossible. Investigators could only narrow down the general locations, but the caller always stayed a step ahead, switching to different payphones to avoid being caught. It seemed he knew about the surveillance and was deliberately playing a cruel game. For nearly 21 years, he relentlessly harassed Susan. Sometimes he would call 7 or 8 times a day, while other times months would go by without a sound, making the torment unpredictable and constant. The experience was terrifying and emotionally draining for Susan. Susan lived in constant anguish, burdened by the endless search for her daughter over 2 decades. The mental and emotional toll was unimaginable. For years, she chased countless false leads, each ending in heartbreak and frustration. Then, in 1993, a glimmer of hope appeared. The caller began using a cell phone, which allowed the FBI to trace the calls. On November 17, 1995, a 48-year-old man named Henry Johnson Blair was arrested. Investigators discovered that Henry had been tormenting Susan with disturbing calls for nearly 21 years. Henry, born in 1947, was married with 2 daughters. He struggled with obsessive-compulsive disorder and alcohol addiction and worked for 24 years at the U.S. Customs Service. But was Amy ever with him? Did Susan finally learn the truth about her daughter? Sadly, no. Henry confessed that he had never met Amy and had made the calls for his own twisted amusement. He admitted to harassing other families of missing persons as well, blaming his behavior on OCD and alcoholism. His excuses offered no comfort or closure for Susan after decades of suffering. His explanation didn't make sense. Mental illness and drinking problems cannot justify terrorizing a grieving mother with cruel claims about her missing child, especially for 21 years. Something about his story never felt right. Then, new and unsettling details emerged. Amy's diary mentioned going to South America with someone named Hank. Henry's nickname also happened to be Hank. Even more disturbingly, Henry had been sent to South America for work at the same time Amy wrote that diary entry. To many, this coincidence seemed impossible to ignore. The link between Amy's Hank and Henry Hank Blair felt more than coincidental. One of Amy's photos showed a white pickup truck, strikingly similar to the one Henry drove at the time. Another eerie detail that fueled suspicion: Henry appeared to be the prime suspect. Could Amy have known him? Had she left behind a clue no one had yet understood? Despite these connections, no direct evidence ever tied Henry to Amy's disappearance. He was charged only with aggravated stalking and served 2 years in prison. After enduring years of torment, Susan sued Henry and eventually reached a $5 million settlement. The bizarre coincidences surrounding Henry and his possible connection to Amy remain haunting. While no proof links him to Amy's disappearance, the overlap between his life and hers is difficult to dismiss. Nothing definitively shows that Henry abducted Amy. But the timing of his South American work trip, Amy's diary entry about going there with Hank, and the photo of the white truck seem too closely aligned to be random. It's entirely possible that Henry and Amy had crossed paths before, perhaps forming a relationship that evolved into a dangerous obsession, explaining why Henry tormented Susan for so many years after Amy vanished. The theory involving a biker gang was always speculation. But Amy's diary entry and the troubling details about Henry stand out as unusual. Henry never explained the white truck seen in photos or Amy's mention of someone named Hank in her diary. Henry died in Florida in 2006 at the age of 59, leaving Susan with no news from Amy and only vague clues. Was Amy still alive somewhere? Possibly held by a biker gang? Did something tragic happen to her in the Everglades? Or did Henry, also known as Hank, somehow evade serious consequences, keeping the truth about Amy's disappearance, and perhaps her death, a secret forever? None of these questions have ever been definitively answered. Amy's diary entry is a key element in the mystery, impossible to overlook, and suspicion about Henry still lingers. Even after more than 30 years, Susan never stopped searching for her daughter. She pursued every possible lead and worked relentlessly to keep Amy's case active and her memory alive. A Facebook page dedicated to Amy Billig was later created, giving Susan another way to hold on to hope that Amy might one day come home. Sadly, Susan passed away from a heart attack on June 7, 2005, at the age of 80, never seeing that hope fulfilled. Throughout her search, she remained a symbol of determination, a mother willing to face any danger to bring her daughter back. She never found peace or closure. Amy's younger brother, Josh, a stonemason, continues to update the Facebook page, honoring their mother's devotion and keeping hope alive that Amy might still be found. The search for Amy has never truly ended. Every clue her family follows seems to lead back to the starting point, bringing a moment of hope but always followed by disappointment. To this day, Amy's fate remains a mystery, deepening the sadness surrounding her story. All anyone can do now is hope that she has found peace, wherever she may be. In the pre-dawn hours, screams rang out, hoarse, angry, and churning, as if from a deep betrayal. When the police broke down the door and entered the apartment, they were met with chaos, overturned furniture, signs of a violent struggle, and a chilling silence. In the bedroom, they found the lifeless body of Igor Pareto, a young businessman, just 27 years old, the victim of an attack so brutal that even seasoned investigators were stunned. But this was more than just a murder. From the very first signs, every clue pointed in the same direction. The culprits were most likely the people Igor trusted the most, the woman he loved, the sister he had always protected, and the close friend he considered like family. This is the story of a family torn apart, a man killed, and a truth that still lurks in the shadows, waiting to be revealed. What really happened in that apartment, and who among those closest to Igor did it? Igor Pareto was born on May 17, 1997, in the state of São Paulo, southeastern Brazil. From the start, he grew up in a large and complex family. His father had several relationships over the years, which resulted in many siblings. This special family structure contributed to shaping Igor's character, helping him become resilient and develop a deep understanding of life. Among his family ties, his relationship with his younger sister, Marceli, stood out as the most significant. As a child, Igor showed determination and restlessness. Ambitious and eager to challenge himself, he demonstrated an entrepreneurial spirit that would later define his life. Business became his true passion. He had a natural talent for identifying opportunities and wasn't afraid to take risks to create his own success. His initiative and determination earned him respect in the community, and he gradually became a notable figure in the business world of Praia Grande, an important coastal city in his life. Although his career developed smoothly, Igor's personal life was not always smooth. He had a distant relationship with a child from a previous romance that had ended without stability. Then, in late 2018, things changed when he met someone who seemed to be everything he had dreamed of. Her name was Rafaela Costa, 1 year younger than Igor. He was drawn not only to her beauty but also to her determination, a quality he deeply admired. Both wanted to build a family, creating a deep and quick bond. Their relationship advanced quickly. In June 2019, they welcomed their first child, an event that marked a turning point in Igor's life. Family became his foundation and greatest pride. He openly expressed his love for Rafaela and his children on social media, clearly showing how much family meant to him. In 2022, at the age of 25, Igor founded his first business, a car dealership. As it grew, his ambitions expanded. He soon launched a marketing company and later opened a second branch focused solely on motorcycles. He collaborated on this project with Mario Vitorino, his brother-in-law and best friend. Mario, Marceli's husband, was not only his business partner but also his loyal companion in life. They shared both work and intimate family moments. During this time, Rafaela and Marceli became close friends, always helping and supporting each other. Closer than sisters-in-law. After 5 years together, Igor decided to propose to Rafaela. She accepted, and for a time, it seemed their lives were perfectly in sync. However, the wedding never took place, and their relationship began to deteriorate. Rafaela recounted that Igor started drinking regularly, which made him jealous, controlling and hot-tempered. Although he never physically assaulted her, one night at a bar, his anger led to a fight that resulted in criminal charges. The case left a mark on his record but ended without major legal consequences. In the following years, Igor and Mario faced another setback when they were investigated for alleged money laundering. They were eventually cleared, but the case fueled gossip and suspicion in their community, tarnishing their reputations with persistent rumors. On July 24, 2024, Rafaela made a tough decision. She chose to separate from Igor. At first, Igor objected, but he respected her choice and moved to another apartment that he owned. During their time apart, Igor decided to make major changes in his life. Believing that self-improvement might win Rafaela back, he adopted healthier habits, worked on losing weight, and, most importantly, gave up alcohol and other substances that had fueled his anger. Nearly a month later, Igor's efforts seemed to have paid off. At the end of August, Rafaela agreed to give their relationship another chance. Igor returned home, and for a moment, their lives seemed to be at peace again. However, that short-lived happiness quickly fell apart. At the end of August, just a month after their first breakup, they decided to go their separate ways. Against this backdrop, on the evening of Friday, August 30, 2024, tragedy struck. That afternoon, Igor dropped his children off at his mother's home, promising to return later that night. He then went with his brother-in-law, Mario, to a party his brother threw, an annual event to celebrate his favorite soccer team's victory. For both Igor and Mario, the party was also a chance to forget the turmoil in their personal lives. Igor wasn't the only one dealing with heartbreak. Mario was also separated from his wife, Marceli, though their divorce wasn't yet finalized. That same evening, Rafaela and Marceli met up. went to dinner, had a few drinks, and then decided to go to the same party that Igor and Mario were attending. They just wanted to meet friends and enjoy the evening. Even though they knew they would run into Igor and Mario at the party, tension lingered in the air. Raffaella and Marcelli sat in one corner, Igor and Mario in the other, neither of them speaking, although they occasionally glanced at each other. By dawn, Raffaella and Marcelli left the party. Raffaella drove Marcelli back to her apartment. Not long after, Igor and Mario also left the party. Igor tried to book a taxi through a ride-hailing app, but Mario insisted on driving him instead, a decision that would have tragic consequences. At daybreak on Saturday, August 31, 2024, peace in a quiet Praia Grande neighborhood was shattered. Neighbors reported disturbances coming from an apartment. The building manager, alarmed by the noise, rang the doorbell repeatedly but got no response. She called the police, who arrived quickly. When knocking failed, officers entered with the help of a locksmith. Inside, they found a horrific scene. Blood spattered the kitchen, living room, and dining area, with stains leading deeper into the apartment. Furniture was overturned, and the space was in complete disarray. Following the blood trail, officers reached a bedroom where they made a grim discovery. On the floor lay the body of a young man, Igor, 27 years old. A large piece of broken furniture, once fitted with mirrored doors, had fallen across him. Glass shards were scattered throughout the room. In the bathroom, investigators found a bloodied kitchen knife taken from an open drawer. Building staff and security footage soon confirmed what investigators suspected: the apartment belonged to Marcelli, and the victim was her brother. What began as a family celebration had ended in unimaginable tragedy. No one else was found at the scene. But the evidence spoke for itself. The violence was intense, hinting that this case would soon shock the entire country. Forensic reports confirmed that Igor had died where his body was discovered. He had suffered dozens of stab wounds, more than 40 in total, mostly to his torso, head, and back. The knife recovered from the bathroom was identified as the murder weapon. As the case made headlines in Brazil, investigators reviewed the building's security footage and reconstructed the details of the night of the murder. At 4:32 a.m., cameras captured Marcelli and Raffaella arriving together by car. They parked at the entrance and took the elevator to the 4th floor. Just over an hour later, Raffaella was seen again, this time alone, taking the elevator down and leaving the building. 13 seconds after her departure, another vehicle arrived. At 5:44 a.m., Igor and Mario entered the elevator together. Igor appeared upset, holding his phone and arguing with Mario. 20 minutes later, Mario and Marcelli were seen leaving the apartment. Instead of using the elevator, they went down the stairs. Minutes after that, cameras in the underground garage recorded them crossing the parking area and exiting through the main door. Multiple witnesses confirmed the video's content. Neighbors reported hearing violent shouting from the apartment, rage-filled screams of betrayal and heartbreak. According to some, one of the men was furious, shouting that he had been deceived by those closest to him, that he madly loved a woman, and that everyone had conspired against him. From those statements, the police came up with the first hypothesis: this was a case of jealousy and betrayal in a family relationship. With the available evidence, the police named 3 main suspects: Marcelli, 20, Mario, 23, and Raffaella, 26. A judge immediately issued a warrant for their arrest for 30 days. However, when the police got involved, all 3 had disappeared. During the investigation, the authorities discovered that Mario had been driving with Igor before the murder. In the meantime, Mario's phone rang, connected to the car's system. The screen displayed the caller's name, Raffaella. Igor immediately understood the problem. He was silent at first, but then became furious and demanded an explanation. The cheerful atmosphere was gone. replaced by suspicion and anger. Igor tried to call and message Rafaela repeatedly, but she didn't reply. When he checked the location-sharing app they both used, he saw that she was at Marceli's apartment. Furious, Igor demanded that Mario drive him there right away. Alerted by Mario and seeing Igor's messages, Rafaela quickly left the apartment. In the short window that followed, after Igor and Mario arrived, the tragedy occurred. Igor's family was plunged into grief, made worse by scandals, accusations, and the unanswered question who would raise Igor's children. In the end, the children's grandmother was granted custody, less than a week after the killing. On September 6th, Marceli and Rafaela surrendered to the civil police. Around the same time, Mario's abandoned car was found near a post office. Inside, investigators discovered what looked like bloodstains on the gear shift and seat, as well as a bottle with similar marks. The car was seized and sent for forensic analysis. A few days later, police received an anonymous tip from one of Igor's brothers. Acting on the information, authorities located and arrested Mario. He was hiding in a house more than 200 meters from Praia Grande, which belonged to Rafaela's uncle. With all three suspects in custody, interrogations began. Contradictions appeared almost immediately. Each suspect told a different story, but they all agreed on one thing. Rafaela and Mario had a secret relationship. Marceli claimed she discovered the affair that same night. Rafaela went further, admitting that she and Mario had also shared an intimate encounter in the early hours of that morning, insisting it had happened only once. According to Marceli's lawyer, when Igor and Mario arrived, she was home alone, intoxicated, under the influence of stimulants, and dressed provocatively. She heard them arguing but assumed it was a typical fight and chose not to intervene. While getting dressed in the dressing room, she heard a loud crash. Igor had kicked a mirror in anger, shattering it. When she came out, she saw Igor seriously injured. Mario claimed he acted in self-defense, saying Igor attacked him with broken mirror shards. His defense team even presented photos showing cuts and bruises on his face and hands. But these had been taken 15 days after the crime, which raised doubts about their credibility. Rafaela denied any involvement in the killing. She said she fled the apartment because Igor had previously threatened to kill her if she ever betrayed him. Later, while driving to her mother's house, she said she received a message from Mario stating that he had to drug Igor to calm him down and warning her to stay away because Igor might hurt her too. Rafaela claimed she did not learn Igor was dead until the next morning. During a meeting with Mario and Marceli at a gas station, shocked, she stayed close to her husband's family while they considered their next move. At one point, she left Marceli with her family and went with Mario to buy him clean clothes because his were stained. The two then checked into a hotel, where Mario showered and changed. Shortly after, Rafaela left him there and returned to the city. However, detectives began developing a different theory. They suspected that Rafaela and Mario had planned the crime together. Text message screenshots showed the two had been discussing spending the night together to celebrate a sports championship hours before the murder. According to the prosecutor, the motives for the crime were twofold. Igor was an obstacle to Rafaela and Mario's relationship, and his death would have brought financial benefits. Mario would inherit full ownership of the motorcycle dealership, while Rafaela, as the mother of Igor's son, would gain access to inheritance rights. Marceli, as Mario's wife, would also benefit indirectly. Based on this, all three were formally charged with aggravated homicide for vile motives, premeditation, and using means that prevented Igor from defending himself. Investigators emphasized that Igor had been killed by people he trusted, which made the crime feel even more treacherous. Meanwhile, the suspects began to alter their stories. Rafaela denied helping Mario hide, although he was ultimately arrested at her uncle's property. Marcelli claimed not to have seen the attack because she was intoxicated and insisted that Mario had entered the apartment himself using a code he already knew. All three portrayed Igor as unstable, aggressive, and dangerous. Prosecutors dismissed these claims. They argued that the broken furniture found on top of Igor suggested he had been pushed and did not cause the damage himself. They also noted that if Mario had acted in true self-defense, Igor would not have suffered dozens of injuries, and someone would have called for medical help instead of fleeing. Marcelli's defense later requested a second autopsy, though it was unclear what purpose this would serve. The request angered Igor's siblings, who accused her of trying to stall the process and prolong their suffering. By this point, it was evident that the case had become one of Brazil's most complex and emotionally charged trials, marked by betrayal, hidden relationships, and financial motives. The court ultimately ruled that Rafaela, Marcelli, and Mario would remain in preventive detention with no set release date while awaiting trial. Throughout 2025, several hearings took place, new witnesses were called, and the lead investigator testified as more evidence was presented. It was eventually decided that the case would go to a jury trial. By early July, after gathering enough evidence, the court rejected all bail requests. The judge cited the crime's extreme brutality, evidence tampering, and the suspects' attempts to flee as reasons to keep them imprisoned. As of today, the case is still ongoing. The Brazilian public continues to follow it closely, awaiting a verdict. Will justice prevail with fairness and transparency? Or will the web of lies, betrayals, and contradictions continue to cloud the truth? The night was quiet, the kind of silence that usually blankets a city after midnight. Yet inside a small apartment in northern Mexico City, something terrible was unfolding. At dawn, the police would discover a scene that no one could have envisaged. A crime so brutal, shocking it would shake an entire nation. To understand what happened that night, and how events brought matters to this point, we must go back to where the story truly began. Ingrid Escamilla Vargas was born on October 3, 1995, in Puebla, Mexico. She was one of 5 sisters and shared a special bond with her twin, Betsy. Together, they grew up in a lively household filled with laughter. Ingrid's father especially played a defining role in shaping her character. When her mother eventually left the household, her father stepped in completely, becoming both mother and father to his daughters, raising them with discipline, love, resilience. Ingrid adored him. She once described him as strong, loving, and brave, a father who gave everything, even when he had very little. His example taught her the value of perseverance and compassion, lessons she carried through her life. Ingrid was ambitious, goal-oriented. She loved learning and believed that education could open doors. After completing high school, she pursued a degree in tourism business administration, a field well suited to her outgoing personality. Her ambition did not stop there. She went on to complete a master's degree in the same field, proving she had both intellect and determination. Friends and classmates described her as organized, dedicated, full of energy. She dreamed of building a career that would allow her to travel, meet new people, and make her family proud. But in 2016, when Ingrid was just 21, tragedy struck. Her beloved father passed away, leaving a void in his daughters' lives that seemed unfillable. For Ingrid, the loss was devastating. In the days that followed, Ingrid expressed her grief and gratitude through heartfelt posts on social media. She thanked him for giving his daughters joy even in difficult times, for teaching them to smile through struggle, and for never abandoning them. She vowed to live in a way that would make him proud, and she did. She poured herself into her studies and work. Friends said she became even more disciplined and driven to honor her father's memory through her achievements. After finishing her studies, Ingrid achieved something she had worked toward for years: a position with the city council. For her, it wasn't just a job. It was the first real step toward building the professional future she had envisioned. She felt both proud and hopeful. It was in that office that she met Eric Francisco Robledo Rosas. Robledo was a civil engineer in his 42nd, born on September 22, 1973, in Puebla, the same municipality where Ingrid had grown up. He was 21 years her senior, an age gap which, while not always decisive, became a significant factor in their relationship. Eric's family was well known in the region, respected and firmly rooted in the local community. But Eric himself didn't reflect the warmth or approachability. Those who knew him described him as moody, distant, and quick to anger. His stern demeanor and sharp tone made people uneasy. One acquaintance recalled that Eric used to play baseball, yet even in a friendly game he often ended up fighting with teammates or opponents. Moments meant for leisure frequently turned into conflicts, an early sign of a man who could not control his emotions, a pattern that would follow him throughout his life. Before meeting Ingrid, Eric had been married to Yvonne Barragan, with whom he shared 2 children. Their marriage, however, was turbulent. Yvonne eventually filed for divorce, citing domestic violence, and at least one formal complaint had been lodged against him for abuse. It was an early warning about the kind of man he truly was. Ingrid and Eric first crossed paths at work. They saw each other daily at the city council. Their interactions gradually shifted from professional to personal. At first, Ingrid was drawn to his maturity and confidence. To her, he appeared experienced, someone who could offer emotional stability. Over time, they began spending more time together. Soon they were in a relationship. After several months, they decided to move in together in an apartment in Mexico City. The transition was slow. Eric settled in first, and then Ingrid, filled with hope for a fresh start, resigned from her job and joined him. Initially, neighbors noticed what seemed like a promising beginning. The couple laughed together on the balcony, went shopping hand in hand, and appeared affectionate in public. But the facade quickly crumbled. Within weeks, arguments erupted. What began as minor disagreements escalated into loud, violent confrontations that filled the building with shouting and thuds against the walls. It soon became clear that Ingrid's new life was far from the dream she had imagined. As time passed, Ingrid began to withdraw. She rarely left the apartment, and when she did, neighbors observed how drained and distant she seemed. Nothing like the vibrant young woman she had once been. There were rumors that Eric had arranged with the building concierge to deny entry to anyone seeking to visit Ingrid when he wasn't home. It hinted at the level of control he exerted over her, a form of isolation that stripped her of freedom and autonomy. On social media, however, Ingrid tried to preserve an image of normalcy. She posted smiling photos and scenes of apparent calm, but beneath the surface, small clues suggested she was suffering. According to testimonies, Ingrid attempted multiple times to escape the abusive relationship. She confided in people around her and even sought help from authorities, filing at least one report for mistreatment. But nothing came of it. The system that should have protected her failed to intervene, leaving her increasingly vulnerable. The emotional strain of her situation grew immense. Neighbors recalled an incident that shocked the entire building. Ingrid attempted to take her own life. The situation was so severe that both police and firefighters had to intervene to save her. It was a desperate cry for help, one few understood fully at the time. Though authorities prevented tragedy that day, nothing truly changed afterward. Inside the apartment, the emotional climate remained volatile. The shouting continued. The tension persisted. Tragically, the warning signs were ignored. In the early hours of February 9th, 2020, the story reached its devastating end. According to his later testimony, Eric came home intoxicated after a night of drinking. The air inside the small apartment was already thick with months of resentment, tension, and fear. It took only minutes for yet another argument to ignite. The shouting escalated quickly. Words turned violent. And in a fit of uncontrollable rage, Eric grabbed a kitchen knife, lunged at Ingrid. He stabbed her in the neck, a wound that killed her almost instantly. But the horror didn't stop there. Consumed by a cold, incomprehensible fury, Eric began mutilating Ingrid's body. He removed pieces of her skin and internal organs, as though trying to erase what he had done. Investigators would later say that the level of violence was unlike anything they had ever encountered. A crime so savage it would haunt the country for years. After killing her, Eric made a gruesome attempt to dispose of the evidence. He dismantled the toilet and tried to flush some of Ingrid's organs down the drain. But they were too large, clogging the pipes almost immediately. When that failed, he placed other parts of her remains into plastic bags, seemingly preparing to dispose of them elsewhere. Adding to the tragedy, his 15-year-old son, who reportedly has autism, was present inside the apartment during these horrific events. Eric still believed he could regain control, that he could somehow cover up the crime. After the murder, Eric called his ex-wife, Yvonne. His tone was calm but chilling. He told her he had killed Ingrid. Yvonne didn't hesitate. She immediately notified the authorities. Police units were dispatched to the northern Mexico City apartment without delay. What they found inside would later be described as one of the most disturbing crime scenes in recent memory. Blood covered the floor. Plastic bags containing human remains were scattered around the room. The toilet had been dismantled in a failed attempt to eliminate evidence. Eric was still there, sitting beside Ingrid's body, his clothes soaked in blood. He made no attempt to flee or resist. When officers confronted him, he confessed immediately. He said he had killed Ingrid during an argument that spiraled out of control and then tried to destroy her remains. There was no ambiguity. He was arrested on the spot, and the apartment was sealed for forensic examination. The next day, February 10th, 2020, Ingrid's remains were released to her family. Her family brought her back to her hometown, where she was mourned and laid to rest. The atmosphere was thick with sorrow, disbelief, and anger. As Ingrid's coffin was carried through the streets, neighbors gathered to pay their respects. Their sorrow quickly turned into collective indignation. How could someone so young, so full of promise, be taken in such a brutal way? But in the days following the murder, as her family struggled to understand the enormity of the loss, something happened that deepened their pain, sparked national outrage. Photographs of Ingrid's mutilated body, taken illegally by public officials at the crime scene, were leaked to the media, spread across social networks. The images, graphic and horrifying, stripped Ingrid of her dignity even in death. What should have been handled with care, respect became another act of cruelty and violation. The leak exposed a deep and troubling flaw within the system, a complete lack of proper protocols to safeguard victims' privacy and protect the integrity of criminal investigations. Public outrage quickly grew into a nationwide debate about accountability, ethics, and the culture of impunity within law enforcement and the media. People demanded justice not only for Ingrid's murder, but also for the cruelty inflicted on her after death by those who should have protected her. Under intensifying social pressure, the government opened an investigation into the public officials involved in the leak. The public's fury didn't remain confined to social media. Just 5 days after the murder, on February 14th, 2020, feminist groups and citizens poured into the streets of Mexico City. Valentine's Day, typically a celebration of love, became a day of anger, mourning, and collective grief. Thousands marched toward government buildings and media outlets carrying signs that read, "Justice for Ingrid and ni una más." The protests soon escalated. A vehicle belonging to a media company was set on fire, a symbolic act against the outlets that had sensationalized and exploited Ingrid's death. It was a moment that captured the exhaustion and fury of women across Mexico. Tired of violence, tired of indifference, and tired of justice perpetually delayed, 2 days later, on February 16th, another march followed, this time outside the building where Ingrid had been killed. Her family, neighbors, and activists gathered for a candlelight vigil, holding photos of her smiling face. The investigation into the leaked photographs moved slowly, but progress eventually came. In December 2020, nearly a year after Ingrid's death, authorities announced the arrest of a police officer accused of distributing the images. For Ingrid's family and the feminist groups who had fought relentlessly, the arrest represented a small but meaningful victory. It could not restore Ingrid's dignity or undo the trauma, but it delivered a clear and long overdue message: those who abuse their power and dehumanize victims will be held accountable. Her case sparked broader institutional reforms as well. The government began reviewing internal protocols to prevent similar violations in the future. Ingrid could no longer speak for herself, but her story compelled others to speak for her, to demand structural change and real accountability. In 2021, court hearings officially began against Eric. Throughout the proceedings, Ingrid's mother became a powerful symbol of resilience. She attended every hearing, faced the cameras, and spoke with unwavering determination. The legal process stretched into 2022, marked by delays and emotional strain. On October 12, 2022, the court declared a recess to carefully review the evidence before issuing its verdict. Finally, on October 13, 2022, the tribunal found Eric Francisco Robledo Rosas guilty of the femicide of Ingrid Escamilla Vargas and sentenced him to 70 years in prison, the maximum penalty allowed by law. He was also ordered to pay 616,100 pesos in damages and cover the funeral costs. For Ingrid's family, the sentence was a long-awaited step toward justice. It could not bring her back or erase the violence she endured, but it affirmed the value of her life. Ingrid's case left deep scars on Mexican society. The brutality of her murder, the cruelty of the leaked photos, and the national outrage that followed transformed her into a symbol of resistance, change. Her story became part of a larger movement, a voice for every daughter, sister, and mother lost to gender-based violence. On a quiet street in a border city between Mexico and the United States, a young woman vanished without a trace, leaving her loved ones in anguish. Her name was Fernanda Gonzalez Serrano. Her phone went silent. Her husband said she had simply left. The police suggested she had run away, but her family knew that was impossible. Fernanda would never disappear without a word. In Tijuana, silence often means something far darker. Weeks later, emergency services received an anonymous call revealing where she had been buried. And then, one night, under the rain, her sister Erica and their father began to dig in the yard themselves, refusing to wait. A little while late, they unearthed the unthinkable. Fernanda had not lived. She had been buried. Fernanda was born in Tijuana and was the oldest of 3 sisters. She had a particularly close relationship with her sister, Erica Serrano Gonzalez. She spent her childhood moving between 2 countries, holding a visa that allowed her to regularly attend school in San Diego. At 16, she met Baudilio Juarez, a 29-year-old divorced man with 3 sons. Their relationship immediately changed the course of her young life. Despite the age difference and obvious challenges, Fernanda fell deeply in love. They soon married in San Diego and settled in Tijuana, beginning what appeared to be a hopeful new chapter. According to her family, Fernanda was kind, calm, and emotionally balanced. She valued harmony especially with her sisters, always encouraged strong family ties. After the wedding, Baudilio suggested that Fernanda stay home while he provided for them financially. He worked in San Diego, where his sons lived, and crossed the border often. Fernanda continued to travel to the United States as well, deeply religious. Baudilio introduced Fernanda to Christianity, a faith she embraced and made part of her daily life. Over time, these changes reflected Baudilio's influence and gradually shaped her worldview. Although their marriage seemed perfect from the outside, troubling issues existed beneath the surface. Erica was the first to learn that Baudilio was abusive. Fernanda confided in her that he repeatedly beat her and used illegal substances. Erica was alarmed and pleaded with Fernanda to leave. However, Fernanda hesitated, hoping her love and patience would be enough to fix the situation. She never reported anything to the authorities. The situation soon deteriorated further. Fernanda would call Erica in desperation, begging her to come and get her because of Baudilio's violent outbursts. Erica often confronted him directly, arguing with him many times. Despite the fear and the warnings from family, Fernanda chose to stay. To outsiders, they looked like an ordinary couple. Neighbors and acquaintances never heard arguments or saw signs of trouble. They spent weekends with Baudilio's sons. In 2012, his eldest, Aaron Juarez, began staying with them, sometimes for extended periods. At first, Fernanda and Aaron got along well. But as he entered adolescence, he became increasingly rebellious. Fernanda assumed it was a phase he would eventually outgrow. Sadly, things only got worse. In late 2018, 20-year-old Aaron moved in with Fernanda and Baudilio permanently. It did not take long before Fernanda realized the problem was far more serious. Aaron was not only aggressive, he used illegal substances and carried a weapon. On December 1, Fernanda's 32nd birthday, she confided to Erica that Aaron had been living with them for several months. When Erica asked about their finances, Fernanda explained that all the money she had saved for a new house had been spent on Aaron's bail and legal problems. The months that followed marked the beginning of a nightmare for Fernanda. Baudilio refused to acknowledge his son's dangerous behavior. On February 3, 2019, the family could no longer reach her. Fernanda was not answering her phone, something completely out of character for her. Attempts to contact Baudilio were also unsuccessful. As night fell, Fernanda's family grew certain something awful had occurred. They reported her disappearance to the police, but the police response shocked them. Officers suggested Fernanda had likely left willingly or run away with someone else. This explanation only increased the family's fear and sense of powerlessness. 2 days later, on February 5, the family learned that Baudilio was in a hospital in San Diego with a gunshot wound to his forearm. According to an employee from the Baja California prosecutor's office who notified local police, Baudilio claimed a man had tried to break into the house and shot him. He said the injury was minor, which was why he went to San Diego for treatment. Erica rushed to the hospital to confront him, desperate to find out what had happened, driven by fear for her sister's safety. At first, Baudilio claimed that $5,000 he had hidden at home had been stolen. Soon after, he changed his story, saying that a much larger amount of dollars was missing. He stated that he had said goodbye to his wife that morning as usual before leaving for work. They briefly discussed their son Aaron, and then Baudilio drove away. Around 7 o'clock a.m., he sent Fernanda a text message saying he had arrived, and then continued with his workday. According to Baudilio, when he returned home that evening, he noticed one of his dogs sitting on the sidewalk. Neighbors told him that the dog had been there since midday. He checked the garage and saw that Fernanda's car was gone, assuming she had gone to the gym. He then saw Aaron and scolded him for taking his vehicle without permission. Before going inside, he stopped at a nearby store. When he returned, he smoked a cigarette, and only then entered the house. He was about to confront his son again when, upon entering the bedroom, he was suddenly faced with an unknown young man pointing a gun at him. He described the intruder as slim, light-skinned, with dark hair. According to Baudilio, the stranger shot him in the right forearm, causing him to fall to the floor and lose consciousness. When he came to, his son was beside him, crying and asking what had happened. Baudilio said he then told Aaron to drive him to San Diego. Investigators immediately found the account suspicious. The house had guard dogs, so a stranger could not have entered Aaron's room unnoticed. These inconsistencies led police to suspect that the events were related to a conflict between Baudilio and Fernanda that had spiraled out of control. One theory was that they had argued Fernanda had been injured during the altercation, which would explain why Baudilio refused to cooperate fully with authorities and appeared to be hiding information. When Erica met with Baudilio, he repeated the same story he had told law enforcement. According to Aaron, they had recently argued because Fernanda believed he was spending too much time gambling. This statement alarmed Erica, who knew exactly what Aaron was involved in. After leaving the hospital, she went straight to the public prosecutor's office to share everything she knew about Aaron's behavior and her fears for Fernanda's safety. Authorities issued a public appeal, asking residents to help in the search. A missing person bulletin was distributed to the media, listing Fernanda's physical characteristics, including a distinctive birthmark on her chest. 2 days later, on February 7, the family discovered that Aaron was still inside the house where Fernanda had lived. They alerted police, who quickly arrived. When officers entered the property, they confirmed that neither Fernanda, her car, nor her personal belongings were present. Aaron was taken to the station for questioning, and Erica accompanied them. Determined not to remain passive, the first surprise came when Aaron gave a version of events that did not match his father's. He claimed that Fernanda and Baudilio had argued that morning, after which she got into her car and drove away. He added that he took his father's vehicle to follow her, but he was unable to catch up, so he went to a friend's house and returned only later. These contradictions only reinforced Erica's suspicions. She urged police to arrest Aaron, but they had no legal grounds at that moment, as Fernanda was still considered missing. After questioning, Aaron was released. Fernanda's family was distraught but determined not to give up. They printed flyers with her photograph and posted them everywhere. Erica used social media to ask for help, begging anyone with information to contact her. Friends and neighbors joined in, hanging large posters with Fernanda's face in central areas of Tijuana. Despite the extensive efforts, days turned into weeks. Fernanda had still not been found. 3 weeks after Fernanda's disappearance, Erica received 2 anonymous phone calls. The callers claimed that Fernanda's body was buried somewhere on her property. The information was disturbing and frightening, especially since the callers were unknown. But Erica could not ignore it. She immediately informed investigators and asked for their assistance. They did not act right away, explaining that the heavy rain made it impossible to begin a search. When authorities finally arrived to search the property, their initial efforts revealed nothing. However, some officers privately told the family that they had noticed areas of disturbed soil that deserved closer examination. They planned to return the following day with trained dogs and specialized equipment. Fernanda's family could not bear to wait. That night, her father, unable to rest, called Erica and suggested they go to the house to search on their own. The rain had stopped. They dug in the yard for hours, desperately hoping to find some sign of Fernanda. While they were there, Baudilio called Fernanda's father, immediately asking what they were doing at the house. The father replied that they had only come to feed the dogs. The conversation ended abruptly, and the father believed Baudilio seemed strangely calm. Shortly afterward, acquaintances and members of Baudilio's family arrived at the property. They claimed they only wanted to see what was happening, attempted to discourage Erica and her father from continuing the search. But Erica and her father refused to stop. Their fear of what might be hidden was greater than the pressure around them. Eventually, Baudilio's acquaintances left. They continued digging. For a long time, their efforts seemed hopeless. Eventually, they decided to move Fernanda's car, which was parked in the yard, and noticed that the ground underneath looked disturbed. Her father began digging there and soon uncovered a shallow grave. After a short time, they unearthed human remains. They immediately contacted the police. Specialists arrived quickly and began recovering the remains. The body was officially identified as Fernanda's, confirming the family's worst fears. Authorities released general information to the media but withheld details about Fernanda's cause of death. The case was officially classified as a violent crime, and an investigation was underway. Meanwhile, police worked to clarify what had happened. Although official statements were limited, local news reports suggested that Fernanda had been killed by a gunshot. 2 days later, a judge issued a warrant. Investigators carried out a thorough search of the house. According to official reports, stains resembling blood were found in the bathroom, the living room, on a sofa. These stains were invisible to the naked eye and only became apparent with specialized equipment. Investigators concluded that Fernanda had likely been killed inside the house, that attempts were made afterward to hide the evidence. Officers spoke to the acquaintances and neighbors. All the evidence points to Aaron's possible involvement in the case and suggests he helped conceal the body in the yard. One witness reported that, days before the incident, Aaron had, while under the influence of illegal substances, talked about getting money from the house. Although he had not openly threatened any violence, Aaron was eventually charged. However, at that time, his whereabouts were unknown, and the prosecutor's office released his photograph, asking the public for assistance in locating him. Fernanda's family offered a reward for any information leading to his capture. Since Fernanda's car had still not been located, authorities appealed for tips and asked that any relevant information be forwarded to both San Diego and Tijuana police. A few weeks later, on March 6, Aaron was arrested in San Diego, United States. However, the arrest was not related to Fernanda's case, but because he already had an extensive criminal record in the country. It appeared he may have been trying to hide with his father to avoid American authorities. His history included numerous offenses dating back to 2014. Since turning 18, he had been repeatedly targeted by police for possession, sale, and transportation of controlled substances, violent theft, weapons possession, participation in robberies, and, according to some reports, affiliation with a street gang. Most recently, he had been arrested for weapons possession, obstructing law enforcement, and selling banned substances. Aaron was under court supervision and required to appear before a judge, but he failed to do so, prompting authorities to issue a warrant for his arrest. When he was finally brought into the courtroom, he appeared calm. His public defender insisted that Aaron had never intended to go into hiding, let alone flee to Mexico. The prosecutor, however, told the judge they were dealing with a man with a long criminal history connected to a street gang, who should not be released. Despite this, the judge decided to free Aaron without bail. Fernanda's family was initially relieved, but when they realized the extradition process would be lengthy and complicated, their confidence gave way to concern. In the meantime, they contacted the authorities. The family's lawyer said the extradition process could take at least 6 days before Aaron is brought back to Mexico to face charges of Fernanda's murder. At the time, Mexican authorities were already consulting with their American counterparts about how Aaron could be prosecuted for his crimes committed in both countries. The prosecutor's office confirmed that extradition proceedings had begun. Investigators later learned that Aaron was not alone on the day of the killing. He had been in the house with 2 young men, consuming illegal substances. Under the influence, he went to look for Fernanda and entered her room, supposedly to stop her from taking his father's money and belongings. He then shot her. Afterward, he wrapped her body in a blanket, carried it to the yard, and buried it. Later, he even attempted to attack Baudilio. Police had no information about who might have helped him conceal the evidence, and investigators continued gathering testimonies. 1 week later, Fernanda's sister stated publicly that she did not believe Aaron had acted alone. She contacted authorities and requested that the investigation be reopened. She also revealed that Baudilio himself had begun to suspect his son and had shared his fears with her. He had reached out to Aaron's mother and probation officer, both of whom were aware of the situation. Around this time, Aaron pleaded guilty to a charge of possession of controlled substances with intent to sell in the United States. He was ultimately sentenced to 2 years in prison, followed by 3 years of probation. Fernanda's relatives, as well as Aaron's family and friends, including Baudilio, attended the hearing. Fernanda's family continued to march through the streets, demanding swift extradition, but then everything grew silent. More than a year passed without progress. The house where Fernanda had been killed and buried stood abandoned, with peeling paint, broken windows, curtains moving in the wind. People avoided the place. Children whispered about the cursed woman's house, and neighbors looked away when they walked by. Aaron was serving his sentence in the United States, but the question of extradition remained unresolved. Then Baudilio disappeared. One day, he failed to show up at work, did not call, did not pick up his children. The Tijuana police opened a new case into his disappearance, but there were no traces and no answers. All that remained were suspicions. Perhaps he knew more than he admitted, and someone did not want that truth to surface. Erica refused to give up. She found a new witness, a woman who lived on the next street. The woman told her she had seen a third man enter Fernanda's house on the day she vanished. No one had ever mentioned him before. He was tall, tattooed, and wore a hood. He did not stay long. He left quickly, as if in a hurry. Erica reported this to investigators, but there was no response. It was as though the truth was heading in a direction no one wanted to acknowledge. The family began receiving threats, anonymous phone calls, and envelopes with nothing inside except a photograph of Fernanda. A silent warning, but Erica pushed forward. She started a blog, recorded videos, and tried to draw media attention. 2 months later, a burned-out car was found in a wooded area near Tijuana. It was Fernanda's car. After years of agonizing waiting, relentless efforts by Erica and her family, the case finally took a major turn in 2025. On May 20th, Aaron Seth Juarez, now 26 years old, was officially extradited from the United States to Mexico after completing a 2-year prison sentence for banned substances-related offenses in San Diego. According to the Fiscalía General de la República, Aaron was handed over at the San Ysidro border crossing in cooperation between the U.S. and Mexican governments, based on an arrest warrant from the Juzgado de Control of Baja California for feminicidio. Preliminary evidence indicates that Aaron, while intoxicated by illegal banned substances, allegedly shot and killed Fernanda. He then reportedly buried her body in his yard, possibly with help from accomplices. Currently, Aaron is being held in custody in Tijuana, awaiting a formal trial in Poder Judicial de Baja California, facing charges that could result in a life sentence under the local criminal code. Erica, in a social media post, expressed relief mixed with outrage, stating, "Justice, belated, but it is still justice for her sister." This case not only closes a long chapter of waiting but also opens new questions about the role of Baudilio, who has been mysteriously missing since 2020, and the possible connections of the case to local criminal groups. Fernanda's family continues to follow the case closely, hoping the upcoming trial will shed light on the whole truth, bringing true peace to the soul of the woman who was taken too soon. In the shadow of an isolated clinic in Nueva Palestina, Chiapas, a young medical intern named Mariana Sanchez Davalos found herself trapped in a tiny, cut off from the world she once knew and subjected to relentless harassment. She begged for help, filing formal complaints that were ignored. Days later, she was found hanging from a rope in the very room meant to provide her shelter. Her body was cremated almost immediately, eliminating the possibility of a thorough forensic examination, and leaving the disturbing sense that an entire system had moved to silence her voice. What truly happened to Mariana, and how far did those responsible go to bury the truth? This is the story of her tragic death. Mariana was born in Mexico City on July 16, 1995. She spent her earliest months there before moving back and forth between the capital and Tuxtla Gutiérrez, where her maternal grandparents lived. Her mother, Lourdes Davalos Abrego, raised her as a single parent. By the age of 6, Mariana settled permanently in Tuxtla Gutiérrez with her mother. She is a thoughtful, gentle girl. After high school, Mariana first pursued dentistry at a local college before realizing that her true vocation was medicine. Later, she transferred to the Universidad Autónoma de Chiapas to become a doctor. Mariana excelled academically, worked in private clinics to gain practical experience, hoped someday to specialize in pathology. Like many young people, she enjoyed spending time with friends, going to parties, staying active at the gym. Those who knew her described her as kind, intelligent, and sincerely. Even when faced with difficult moments, Mariana met them with courage. On social media, she shared memes, motivational quotes, and posts celebrating her love for sweets, junk food. She also advocated for causes she believed in, including the importance of blood, bone marrow, and organ donation. As part of her final year in medical school, Mariana was required to complete her social service at a public clinic in Monterrey, just a few hours away from where her mother had recently moved. Mariana and Lourdes weren't just mother and daughter, they were inseparable, true best friends. Their bond grew even stronger after Lourdes was diagnosed with cancer. They faced every hurdle side by side. Because of their close relationship, Mariana made it a priority to visit her mother every weekend she could. Placements for social service were assigned through a public selection process, partly based on academic ranking. Students received a modest monthly stipend of about $150 to $200. In August 2020, Mariana was assigned to the Unidad Médica Rural in Nueva Palestina, an indigenous community within Ocosingo, Chiapas. The location was remote, under-resourced, and challenging for any young doctor. For Mariana, it quickly became overwhelming. Upon arriving at Nueva Palestina, Mariana was placed in a small, bare room that was barely fit for living. Accounts describe it as 4 unpainted gray walls with no bed, forcing her to bring her own or improvise with whatever she could find. The room was infested with insects and lacked even the most basic necessities, including a bathroom. With no internet and unreliable cell service, she was completely cut off from the outside world. To use the restroom, she had to cross an empty lot and share poorly maintained facilities with other staff members. Her room did not even have a proper door, only a sheet of black plastic hung like a curtain, offering no privacy or protection. The clinic itself was a modest structure standing alone on a remote stretch of land. The local community, despite having very limited resources, had united to build it in hopes of finally having access to consistent medical care. Although the intention behind the clinic was admirable, the reality was far more alarming. The working conditions were harsh, and the area was known for being unsafe, with reports of violence and threats against healthcare workers in the region. From the moment Mariana arrived, she sensed danger. Her mother later recalled that as soon as Mariana walked into the building, she felt an overwhelming urge to leave. Stories of thefts, armed attacks, even lynchings in nearby communities only intensified her fear. The broken door to her room left her completely exposed at night, deepening her anxiety and sense of vulnerability. Yet the worst part was not the isolation or the lack of basic living conditions. It was the relentless harassment she endured. Mariana confided in her family that a male co-worker had been harassing her, making her feel even more unsafe. She wanted to request a transfer, but the bureaucratic process and lack of institutional support made it nearly impossible. Her mother urged her to abandon the assignment altogether, but Mariana was determined to complete her social service year so she could move on to her medical residency. Though she had already filed multiple complaints, neither the local authorities nor her university took her concerns seriously. Her formal request for reassignment was ignored, leaving her trapped in a hostile and increasingly dangerous environment. By November, the situation had escalated into something terrifying. Mariana sent a disturbing message to her mother and a close friend describing a traumatic incident. One night, the same coworker who had made her feel unsafe for months entered her room while heavily intoxicated. Before she could react, he climbed into her bed and began touching her aggressively. Mariana fought him off with everything she had, but he refused to leave. That night, her roommate, a nurse, was not there, leaving Mariana completely alone and defenseless. Even before this assault, she had filed an official complaint in hopes of escaping the situation. But instead of offering protection, the clinic director brushed off her concerns and refused to approve her transfer. With no meaningful support from those in charge, she remained stuck in the very place where she feared for her life. According to her mother, the harassment continued night after night. She suspected Mariana did not reveal the full extent of what she was suffering, likely to spare her mother from worry. It is possible the abuse went far beyond what Mariana ever admitted. Despite the fear and isolation, Mariana officially reported the harassment to the public prosecutor's office. But once again, nothing happened. The clinic simply sent her to a nearby town and suggested she take a few days to recover. Meanwhile, the prosecutor's office dismissed her complaint and put the case on hold without further action. Frustrated and distraught, Mariana filed another formal complaint with the Secretaría de Salud de Chiapas. Yet nothing meaningful came of it. The situation had become a nightmare, and the thought of returning to the clinic filled her with dread. Then, in January 2021, the tragedy she feared most unfolded. On Thursday, January 28th, Mariana had already packed her bags. She was preparing to return to Tuxtla Gutiérrez that coming weekend. After finishing her final consultations, she spoke with her mother that afternoon. Lourdes immediately sensed something was wrong. Mariana sounded anxious, rushed, and emotionally exhausted. She admitted that the harassment had not stopped and that she planned to speak with the clinic director one more time in hopes of finally being transferred. She promised to call her mother after work, but that call never came. By Friday, January 29th, there was still no response. Late that morning, one of Mariana's close friends delivered the devastating news to her mother. Mariana had been found dead, hanging from a rope inside the tiny room where she had been living beside the clinic. The news crushed her family. Lourdes was overcome with shock and confusion, haunted by endless questions. Despite her own fragile health, she immediately booked a flight to Chiapas. After more than 8 exhausting hours of travel, including multiple layovers, she finally arrived to claim her daughter's body. But officials delayed the process, and she was not allowed to see Mariana until the next morning. When the moment came, Lourdes could not bring herself to open the coffin. She spent nearly 20 minutes gazing at the closed lid before it was taken away. Unable to face the unbearable reality, the autopsy stated only that Mariana died from asphyxiation by hanging. The official report labeled it an end her life. Yet while Lourdes and the rest of the family were absent, Mariana's body was cremated that same day. Lourdes insisted she had never signed any authorization for cremation. The family was stunned by how quickly everything had been arranged. There was no time for a proper goodbye, and the haste only deepened their suspicions. The speed and certainty with which authorities concluded Mariana's death was end. Her life left her loved ones with more questions than answers. Neither the pattern of harassment she had reported nor the active complaint she had filed seemed to be taken into account. The family's lawyer pointed out major irregularities in the case. He emphasized that cremating Mariana's body was not only improper, it was illegal. under Mexican federal criminal procedure. No person who dies under violent or suspicious circumstances, including possible end her life, may be cremated, as doing so destroys essential forensic evidence. By authorizing the cremation, authorities made a thorough investigation nearly impossible. As public pressure mounted, the Chiapas prosecutor's office released a statement claiming the autopsy showed no signs of physical or abuse. Violence. They also stated that Mariana had never formally reported abuse assault, but their comments did little to calm the growing national outrage. Medical interns across Chiapas, along with students from the Universidad Autónoma de Chiapas, announced an indefinite strike. They rejected the official narrative surrounding Mariana's death and demanded a full investigation. Students from both the medical and gerontology programs wrote an open letter accusing the university of failing to protect Mariana and ignoring her repeated cries for help. They called her death a femicide, insisting that she had been killed and that her death could have been prevented if her complaints had been taken seriously. People from all backgrounds joined the call for justice. Social media became a powerful tool to expose the inconsistencies and negligence. In Mariana's case, thousands used hashtags like Justicia para Mariana to share messages, videos, and testimonies condemning the institutions that had failed her. The movement spread rapidly, fueling anger across the nation. Before long, the demand for justice grew beyond online activism, exploded into demonstrations throughout the country. To many, Mariana's case symbolized a collective failure, not just of one clinic or one director, but of an entire system that abandoned her. Despite her repeated pleas for protection, both government and university authorities looked the other way. The very institution tasked with safeguarding her during her final year of study failed not only to protect her life, but also to support her family in their search for truth and justice. The case ignited a nationwide debate, exposing the long-standing institutional neglect surrounding tragedies like Mariana's. In response, Mexico's Ministry of the Interior instructed the Chiapas Attorney General's office to comply with legal protocols for investigating deaths of women, treating the case as a potential femicide and ensuring it followed a gender-sensitive investigative approach. In a public statement, authorities affirmed they were maintaining close communication with Mariana's family and promised full support, transparency. They also confirmed that the Chiapas Secretariat for Gender Equality had become involved, offering assistance to Mariana's grieving mother. Despite still recovering from surgery, Lourdes publicly expressed her gratitude on February 2nd to everyone who had rallied behind her daughter's cause. In an emotional video shared on social media, she criticized government officials who tried to shift blame onto Mariana. Her words resonated deeply across the country and revealed the profound mistrust she felt toward the authorities. At the time, Lourdes still had not been granted access to the case files or an official copy of the investigation. Frustrated by the secrecy, she urged the public to keep demanding genuine justice. Then, on February 13th, Annalí N., the clinic director in Nueva Palestina, where Mariana had been stationed, was arrested. The Chiapas State Attorney General's office accused her of abusing her authority by failing to report the mistreatment Mariana was suffering. Despite having full knowledge of it, even though Mariana repeatedly complained, Annalí dismissed her concerns with superficial gestures such as telling her to take a few days off. She also promised to transfer the man harassing Mariana but never followed through. In a striking detail, it was a neighbor, not the clinic staff, who ultimately called police the morning Mariana's body was discovered on January 29th. A judge ordered Annalí into pre-trial detention, citing clear evidence of negligence. Independent journalists who reviewed the police file pointed out alarming omissions. The Chiapas Attorney General's office had authorized Mariana's cremation, making further forensic testing impossible. The investigation file also showed fundamental failures in standard femicide protocols. Despite Mariana's prior warnings that she was in danger, investigators appeared more focused on ruling out other outside suspects than on identifying who might be responsible. The report even portrayed Mariana negatively, describing her as confused, uncommunicative, and difficult, While nearly ignoring the gender-based violence she had repeatedly denounced, officials continued insisting that Mariana alone was responsible for her death. The death certificate stated that she died on January 28 at 8:30 p.m. from asphyxiation by hanging. However, critical forensic details were missing: the type of rope used, the knot, the suspension point, and the exact location where she was found. Early reports from the scene raised additional concerns. Investigators documented Mariana in a kneeling position, her fists clenched and arms extended downward, a position inconsistent with a typical hanging. Some first responders even assumed, at first glance, that she was resting rather than deceased. Worse still, investigators questioned her colleagues about irrelevant and offensive personal details. Some claimed she rarely showered, while another suggested she took antihistamines, though no medical record supported this. To Mariana's family, these comments appeared to be a calculated effort to discredit her and steer attention away from potential suspects. Despite numerous irregularities, the family's lawyers identified Fernando Cuauhtemoc, the doctor who had been harassing Mariana, as a central figure. His identity was initially concealed, but his name eventually surfaced through social media. On February 18th, police raided his home, but he had already fled. A few hours later, Fernando unexpectedly surrendered himself and recorded a video denying any involvement in Mariana's death, claiming he was being unfairly targeted. He was formally jailed, though only on charges related to abuse harassment. Authorities stated that the harassment case and the investigation into Mariana's death were being treated as separate proceedings, a decision that fueled even more public outrage. Mariana's family remained unwavering in their pursuit of justice. In one of the initial court hearings, the Chiapas Attorney General's office presented evidence directly linking Fernando to the harassment complaint Mariana had filed before her death. Even more disturbing information surfaced. Fernando had a documented history of harassing women, with accusations from multiple victims dating back several years. Because of the severity of these allegations, the judge ordered his preventive detention, sending Fernando to prison while the investigation continued. Lourdes was the driving force behind the relentless campaign that ultimately led to Fernando's arrest. From the moment she learned of her daughter's death, she refused to remain silent. She spoke publicly, challenged authorities, and demanded accountability. Despite her courage, the investigation into Mariana's case was plagued by long delays and bureaucratic resistance. Lourdes carried much of her pain privately, pushing forward even as her own health deteriorated. On August 8, 2021, after a long and excruciating battle with bone cancer, Lourdes passed away. She died without ever seeing the justice she had fought so desperately to secure for her daughter. During Fernando's trial, the court reviewed Mariana's initial complaint, filed just 2 months before her death. Additional evidence revealed that in February 2013, another woman, a nurse, had formally accused Fernando of attempting to assault her on at least 2 occasions while they worked together in different medical facilities in Chiapas. These earlier allegations painted a troubling pattern, yet despite the mounting evidence, Fernando maintained his innocence. In a statement to police shortly after his arrest, he claimed he had never even spoken to Mariana. He also said that the day after her death, he was at a medical laboratory in Tuxtla Gutierrez undergoing routine tests, a detail he offered voluntarily. On November 25, 2021, Fernando was sentenced to 3 years in prison, but only for harassment. After more than a year of public outrage and investigation, no one, neither Fernando nor any other official, was ever formally charged, accused, or convicted in connection with Mariana Sanchez's death. To this day, the forensic evidence in Mariana's case remains limited, incomplete, and riddled with contradictions. Critical questions were left unanswered. The circumstances surrounding her final hours continue to be obscured by negligence, institutional failure, and lost evidence. The truth behind what happened to Mariana Sanchez remains shrouded in uncertainty, a wound that justice has yet to heal. In the tranquil land of Idaho, where lush forests and pristine lakes have been intertwined with human life for generations, no one could have imagined that one of America's most shocking crimes originated there. Larry Eisenberg, a respected 68-year-old man, had been eagerly anticipating the morning of February 13, 2018, to celebrate Valentine's Day with his beloved wife. But just a few hours later, his dream of a peaceful day was shattered. It wasn't an accident on the icy lake. The truth, revealed from beneath the surface of Lake Coeur d'Alene, was far more cruel. Larry Eisenberg was born in 1950 in Idaho and has lived almost his entire life in the state. He grew up surrounded by dense forests and clear lakes, the kind of landscape that would shape him from childhood through adulthood. From a young age, he understood the value of hard work, a principle he always carried with him. He attended the University of Idaho, where he earned a degree in forestry, a natural path for someone raised amid a thriving timber industry. After graduation, Larry built a strong career in the lumber business, eventually rising to an executive position. Colleagues remembered him as tough, disciplined. He didn't waste money. He didn't tolerate laziness. In 1974, Larry married his first wife. Together, they had 2 children, a daughter named Jessica and a son named Dean. He raised his children with the same values he lived by: hard work, honesty, and integrity. The marriage lasted until the children reached adulthood, and then it quietly ran its course. Larry and Lori met through the Coeur d'Alene Chamber of Commerce, where both were active in the local business community. Some accounts suggest that she was hired as his secretary while he was still married, and that their relationship began after both their marriages ended. Lori was born in 1953. Her early years were starkly different from Larry's steady Idaho upbringing. She grew up within a sect of the Latter-day Saints Church, and her childhood was marked by deep poverty. There were times her family had so little that they squatted in abandoned farmhouses, moving from place to place. At the age of 19, she married Stephen Barnes. Over the following years, they had 6 daughters together. Lori devoted herself to motherhood and, outwardly at least, created a stable home. Her daughter Amber would later describe their early family life as nearly perfect. Lori seemed determined to give her children the structure she had never known growing up. Her marriage to Stephen lasted more than 20 years, ending in 1996. At 43, Lori stood at another crossroads, a single mother ready to start over in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. In this new city, Lori reinvented herself. She became deeply involved in community work and eventually earned the title of Volunteer of the Year from the Coeur d'Alene Chamber of Commerce. She was the kind of person who showed up at events, remembered names, and built connections with ease. Over time, she rose to become the executive director of the North Idaho Housing Coalition, a nonprofit tied to federal housing funds. It was a position of enormous trust, one that gave her access to significant resources intended to help vulnerable families. To the outside world, Lori had overcome a difficult childhood and transformed herself into a respected pillar of the community. When Lori and Larry married, they blended a large family of 8 children, Larry's 2 and Lori's 6, along with 15 grandchildren, a great-grandchild. They owned a secluded cabin, a place where the family gathered for holidays, celebrations, and long weekends. From the outside, their marriage looked idyllic. A colleague who knew them said Larry trusted Lori without hesitation. They traveled often, visited grandchildren, took small vacations, building what seemed to be an ideal retirement. The stepchildren on both sides seemed to get along well. Despite Larry's reputation for discipline and frugality, he had a warmth that extended to this newly blended family. On February 13, 2018, the day before Valentine's Day, Larry and Lori had made plans. They would take their boat onto Lake Coeur d'Alene before sunrise to watch the dawn break over the water. After the boat ride, they planned to enjoy a special Valentine's breakfast together. They left their home while it was still dark, the winter air sharp and biting. The lake was silent at that hour, the water dark and calm. They launched the boat and moved across the cold morning surface as the first faint traces of light crept into the sky. According to Lori's later account, everything was normal at first. They sat together watching the sky shift colors, enjoying the quiet of early morning. Then, something went wrong with the motor. Larry leaned toward it to take a look. She said he gave her a strange expression, something she described as stroke-like symptoms, and then he toppled overboard into the freezing cold water. According to official accounts, Lori didn't call for help for 2 hours. When questioned afterward, she said she didn't want to leave the area where Larry had fallen, that she had been searching the area for him, not wanting to abandon him. It was only after about 2 hours that she reached an area with cell phone signal to call 911. When rescuers arrived, they found Lori clearly injured. The boat was intact. Larry was nowhere to be seen. The water temperature that morning was very cold, only about 4 degrees Celsius. In these conditions, without timely rescue, survival would only be measured in minutes, not hours. Divers searched the entire lake while rescue teams looked for any trace of him. Days passed. The community anxiously watched, waited, and hoped. Lori seemed devastated in interviews, expressing her grief and shock over the sudden, tragic loss of her husband. About a week later, she wrote a touching letter to friends and family, vividly recounting the morning, the early trip to the lake, the moment things went wrong, her desperate attempts to save him. She portrayed herself as a heartbroken widow. However, investigators were already suspicious. The 2-hour delay in calling emergency services is baffling. The details of her story changed slightly each time she told it. Also, the bloody nose she said she got while trying to pull Larry from the water raised concerns. On March 1, 2018, Larry Eisenberg's body was recovered from Lake Coeur d'Alene, roughly 2.5 weeks after his disappearance. The autopsy results would alter everything investigators thought they knew. Larry had not drowned. The cause of death was diphenhydramine toxicity, a common, easily accessible antihistamine. The concentration of this substance in his blood was measured at 7,100 nanograms per milliliter, much higher than the therapeutic level, indicating that he had intentionally ingested a large amount of it. This was suddenly a homicide inquiry. Soon, investigators uncovered something else, something that changed the case entirely. On the very day Larry disappeared, Lori was publicly charged in a criminal investigation. The double life Lori had been living for years was finally beginning to unravel. As executive director of the North Idaho Housing Coalition, Lori had access to federal funds designated to help low-income families secure housing. Over several years, she systematically embezzled from this organization, fabricating invoices, inventing fake repair and inspection jobs, creating shell companies in her daughter's names, and funneling the money into her own accounts. The total amount she stole exceeded $500,000. 4 of her 6 daughters were implicated. Amber Hosking received approximately $16,500. Jessica Barnes received around $15,500. Tracy Tesh and April Barnes also received embezzled funds. All 4 would eventually face federal charges. Larry, who valued financial integrity above all else, was completely unaware of his wife's crime. He trusted her completely. And when Larry learned the truth, everything he believed about his life would collapse. The woman he admired was in reality a fraud facing federal prosecution. The financial security he had spent decades building would be wiped out by restitution and legal fees. His reputation could be destroyed by association. Prosecutors later argued that this looming exposure provided the motive for murder. Lori couldn't risk Larry discovering what she had done. She couldn't face the confrontation. the fallout, the divorce, or the complete implosion of the life she had carefully constructed. And so, according to the prosecution's theory, she chose a different path, one that ended with Larry's death. Investigators soon uncovered more disturbing signs. Digital forensics revealed something chilling. While Larry and Lori were vacationing in Florida, someone had performed Google searches on drowning, water currents, and deep water conditions. Those searches were traced directly back to Lori. And there was another detail. After Larry vanished, a text message was sent from his phone to one of his friends, but the message included an emoji. Everyone who knew Larry confirmed he never used emojis. Meanwhile, Lori uses them frequently. Then investigators uncovered the issue of the will. They found handwritten modifications to Larry's estate documents, changes that shifted 80% of his assets to Lori's 6 daughters, leaving only 20% to Larry's own children, Dean and Jessica. These changes were not legally valid and appeared to be part of a broader plan to reroute Larry's wealth after his death. The investigation into Lori is now proceeding in 2 parallel directions: the federal embezzlement case and the state-level murder investigation. The federal case progressed first. Lori was arrested for wire fraud, theft from federally funded programs. The evidence was overwhelming. Years of fabricated invoices, sham companies, money trails leading back to her and her daughters. In 2019, she pleaded guilty and received a 5-year federal sentence, along with full restitution and fines. The murder case, however, was more complicated. Prosecutors needed to prove not only that Larry had been poisoned, but that Lori had administered the poison. The evidence was largely circumstantial, but deeply compelling. The unexplained 2-hour delay, the Florida Google searches on drowning and currents, the lethal diphenhydramine levels inconsistent with any accident, the emoji text sent from Larry's phone, the altered will, the exposure of the embezzlement case happening the same day Larry disappeared, and Larry's complaints to his doctor about tremors, foggy thinking during their recent travels. Those symptoms raised the possibility that Lori had been poisoning him gradually. In February 2020, exactly 2 years after Larry's death, Lori Eisenberg was charged with first-degree murder. Prosecutors cited aggravating factors, including the use of poison and evidence of lying in wait. There was one challenge. However, investigators could not determine exactly how Larry consumed the fatal dose of diphenhydramine. Was it mixed into coffee, food, a drink on the boat that morning? The delivery method remained unknown. But what was undeniable was the staggering concentration of the drug in his blood, a level impossible to reach by accident. The case never proceeded to a full jury trial. Instead, in 2021, Lori entered an Alford plea to second-degree murder. Under an Alford plea, a defendant does not admit guilt but acknowledges that the prosecution has enough evidence to secure a conviction. It allowed her to be sentenced without fully confessing, a legal nuance that would later cause deep anguish for Larry's family. At sentencing, Lori finally spoke. She admitted responsibility for Larry's death, but her explanation stunned everyone present. She claimed she had intended to take her own life that morning, not Larry's. She said she had prepared a drink laced with diphenhydramine for herself and that Larry had accidentally consumed it. The judge rejected her account outright. Considering the mountain of evidence, the court found her explanation implausible. It simply did not align with the facts. Larry's family addressed the court with raw and unfiltered emotion. His daughter, Jessica Barnes, spoke about the permanent hole left in her soul after her father's death, and the impossibility of true closure while the person responsible still refused to tell the truth. She described how Lori's Alford plea, allowing her to avoid a full admission of guilt. Even Lori's own stepdaughter, Amber, stood against her. She told the court that Larry had been a loving father figure, a devoted grandfather to her and her siblings. She testified that her mother had manipulated their entire family. Looking back, Amber expressed regret for not cooperating with investigators sooner. before the depth of her mother's deception fully came to light. The sentence was life in prison, with a minimum fixed term of 30 years before she could be considered for parole. Combined with her federal sentence for embezzlement, Lori Eisenberg will not be eligible for release until 2050, at which point she will be 97 years old. The case fractured the family beyond repair. At 68, Larry believed he had earned a peaceful retirement with the woman he loved. He never imagined that beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect marriage, an entirely different reality was taking shape. Today, Lori Eisenberg is incarcerated at the Pocatello Women's Correctional Center in Idaho. She sits with the consequences of her choices, while Larry's grandchildren grow up without him, and his children continue carrying an absence that nothing can fill. The cabin where the blended family once gathered still stands, but its meaning has changed forever. Twin girls Alessia and Livia Shep left home with their father for a normal weekend. However, after only 48 hours, both girls vanished without a trace. With no witnesses and no bodies, what remained was the father's mysterious journey through 3 countries, unusual cash transactions, and cryptic, desperate letters. Ultimately, he died on the train tracks, taking all his questions with him. What started as a family dispute became one of Europe's most chilling mysteries, leaving many unanswered questions. Did he harm his children? Or did he hand them over to someone hiding them? Why did thousands of euros disappear? And what really happened on the island of Corsica, at a time when there were no cameras or witnesses to corroborate the story? 13 years have passed without any evidence, bodies, or confessions. Only one mother remains, persistently hoping that her child is still alive somewhere in the world. Alessia and Livia Shep were born on October 7, 2004, as identical twins. In the photos, they look like 2 versions of the same child, with blonde hair, a slender build, and identical glasses. The twins were very close, often described as happy, playful, and affectionate by those who knew them. They were devoted to their mother and adored their father, easily navigating their bilingual environment of French and Italian. Their daily lives consisted of school, playdates, and small adventures by the lake. Their mother, Irina Meme Lucidi, was originally from Ascoli Piceno, Italy. With her high level of education, she built a career as a lawyer and became a senior legal advisor for a large multinational company in Lausanne. In photographs from that time, she looks calm, elegant, and professional. However, Irina's world revolved around her daughters, Alessia and Livia. She often talked about her children, their progress, the interesting things they had said, and even the small difficulties that children find very significant. Irina's life revolved around balancing her demanding job with the joys of motherhood, and her daughters meant everything to her. Their father, Matthias Shep, was born on July 30, 1967, in Toronto to Swiss parents. He grew up in an environment that valued education and work, becoming an engineer. When his 2 daughters were born, he worked for a large international company in Lausanne. He was seen as the epitome of a successful father with a stable job, a family, and a cozy home in a safe Swiss town. Friends and neighbors noted that he was polite, intelligent, and attentive to his daughters, often attending school events and taking them on weekend outings. Irina and Matthias met around 2003 during a company retreat in the mountains. Their story seemed almost cinematic: an Italian lawyer and a Swiss engineer, both building careers, meeting in the Swiss Alps. They married in 2004, and soon after, twins were born, creating a picture of a perfect family. However, what was happening inside their marriage wasn't quite like that. As Alessia and Livia grew, Irina and Matthias's relationship began to deteriorate. The pressure of work, raising children, and various expectations gradually weakened their harmony. Irina noticed Matthias becoming increasingly controlling and rigid. Arguments and tension escalated, becoming a part of their daily lives. Irina, with her rational thinking, tried to resolve the issue and persuade Matthias to participate in marriage counseling. Initially, this seemed like a promising step towards resolving their problems. However, after just 2 sessions, Matthias opted to continue therapy alone. The details of his conversations in those sessions remain confidential and unknown to anyone outside that space. By August 2010, Irina and Matthias had separated after much consideration. Irina left their shared home and moved to a nearby apartment. While the 2 girls alternated between living with their mother and their father, the divorce and custody negotiations quickly became complicated. Matthias aimed for shared custody, hoping to remain a central part of his daughters' lives. He also held out hope that the separation could be temporary, and that he could persuade Irina to consider reconciliation. Conversely, Irina was firm in her decision. She no longer believed their marriage could be salvaged and wanted stability for her daughters and clear boundaries for herself. She insisted that any custody arrangements focus solely on the twins and not on his attempts to win her back. In establishing these boundaries, Irina acted in what many would see as a reasonable manner, ensuring that custody and visitation schedules were respected. For Matthias, the divorce was a huge shock. He was no longer a husband in a family, but merely a father who could see his daughters on a schedule. His once stable life had splintered into fragments, days spent with the girls and days without them. The future he had envisioned was slipping away. On Friday, January 28, 2011, as part of the custody arrangement, Matthias picked up his twin daughters, Alessia and Livia, for their weekend visit. The twins were accustomed to spending weekends with their father, enjoying the change of pace and atmosphere compared to their mother's home. The plan was straightforward: a weekend with Matthias, followed by their return to school on Monday morning. Nothing about this pickup indicated anything was amiss. On Saturday, January 29, 2011, Matthias texted Irina that they were fine and would be back on Monday. It was a reassuring message, suggesting that the girls were fine and that the weekend was proceeding smoothly, albeit with a slightly altered schedule. On Sunday, January 30, 2011, Alessia and Livia were seen playing with a neighbor's child near Matthias's home in St. Sulpice. In the early afternoon, Matthias picked them up and left. In the following hours, his journey began to differ unusually from the regular weekend schedule. After 6:00 p.m., Matthias's car crossed the border from Switzerland into France, near Geneva. At 6:21 p.m., near Annecy, Matthias sent another text to Irina, stating he would return the girls to school the next morning. That would be the last message he ever sent her. At 7:38 p.m., near Lyon, he turned off his phone, never to turn it on again. That evening, Alessia and Livia were supposed to be getting ready for school the next day. But instead, they were with Matthias, on their way to an unknown destination. When Alessia and Livia didn't show up at school on Monday, January 31, Irina immediately sensed something was wrong. She attempted to contact Matthias but received no reply. Soon, Irina reported her daughters missing, leading the police to initiate an immediate search. Investigators painstakingly tracked Matthias's movements, trying to follow a route that crossed international borders and delved into increasingly alarming territory. On January 31, investigators located Matthias in Marseille. Around 12:30 p.m., he withdrew a large amount of cash, approximately 7,000 to 7,500 euros, from several ATMs near the Old Port. That day, he also sent a postcard to Irina from Marseille, though its contents have never been fully disclosed. Furthermore, he purchased 3 ferry tickets from Marseille to Propriano in Corsica. Witnesses and passenger records confirm that he boarded the ferry that evening along with Alessia and Livia. As he was buying tickets and boarding the ferry, Irina was in Switzerland. Growing more frantic, she was giving statements to the police, recounting the last text messages she had received, describing what the girls were wearing, and battling the dawning realization that something was very wrong. On Tuesday, February 1, around 6:30 a.m., the ferry arrived in Propriano on Corsica's southwest coast. Some witnesses later claimed to have seen Matthias disembarking with two small girls, while others were uncertain. Unfortunately, the footage from that morning was limited and of poor quality. No one knew for sure who was with him that morning. What transpired during the daylight hours on Corsica remains one of the central mysteries of this case. Matthias is believed to have traveled across the island from Propriano to Bastia on the northeast coast. By that evening, he had purchased a single ticket for the night ferry from Bastia to Toulon, mainland France. Just one ticket, not three. When the ferry arrived in Toulon the next morning at around 7 o'clock a.m. On February 2nd, witnesses and CCTV footage confirmed one key detail: Matthias was alone. On the same day, highway toll cameras captured images of him driving alone on a French highway. He continued driving, his vehicle easily recognizable, with no one else accompanying him. At some point, he crossed from France into Italy. On Thursday, February 3rd, around noon, a witness saw Matthias near Salerno on the Amalfi coast. He was alone, purchased food, and then continued southeast towards Cerignola in the Apulia region. Later that evening, at about 10:47 p.m., Matthias walked in front of an oncoming train at the Cerignola railway station and died instantly. Authorities found his body along with his car and some personal belongings at the scene. His car had child seats and everyday items, but there was no sign of Alessia and Livia. Matthias only had about 100 euros in cash left, a small amount compared to the thousands he had withdrawn just days before. With his death, the case transformed drastically. Investigators shifted from resolving the custody dispute between Matthias and Irina to unraveling an international mystery, as the only person who might hold the answer had now passed away. Matthias was considered the main suspect, but Alessia and Livia were still missing. Following Matthias's death, evidence began to emerge, shaping the investigation and sparking years of debate about the truth of the matter. Postcards and letters sent from France, and possibly Italy, started arriving at Irina's home. Some were dated before his death, while others were dated close to it. Authorities examined these letters, and certain excerpts would later become critical to the investigation. The media reported that one notable line stated that the children rested in peace and had not suffered. Investigators interpreted this as a confession from Matthias, suggesting he was informing Irina that the twins were dead and that he was responsible for their painless deaths. However, Irina never fully accepted this interpretation. Without bodies or forensic evidence, she refused to believe her daughters were definitely deceased until she had clear proof. Forensic analysis of Matthias's computer revealed disturbing searches. He had looked up firearms, poisons, and ferry schedules to Corsica. This indicated that he didn't act impulsively. Rather, he had considered violent options, explored escape routes, and researched transportation. The evidence revealed careful planning rather than sudden desperation. The financial aspects raised more questions. Matthias had withdrawn large sums of money in Marseille and sent several thousand euros to Irina before he died. Yet, when his body was found, he had only about 100 euros on him. Where did the rest of the money go? Had he spent it traveling? Had he hidden it or given it to someone for something? The missing money became a significant piece of circumstantial evidence supporting various conflicting theories. Authorities conducted thorough searches in Corsica, especially around Propriano, Bastia, and other areas Matthias might have visited. Some media reported traces of blood found on rocks in one location, but no conclusive identification was established. Investigators also searched Lake Geneva and areas in southern Italy near Cerignola, but no remains or confirmed evidence of Alessia and Livia was ever found. In summary, the letters, computer searches, missing money, and fruitless searches only sketched a vague outline of a tragedy. The task of transforming that outline into a coherent story regarding the fate of Alessia and Livia fell to investigators across 3 countries. Police in Switzerland, France, and Italy coordinated a large multinational investigation, sharing information across borders and issuing Interpol notices. Every detail of Matthias's journey has been thoroughly reviewed. Investigators searched every location he was known to visit, with particular attention given to what happened in Corsica. The general timeline is clear. Matthias took a ferry from Marseille with 3 tickets, likely disembarked in Propriano with his twin daughters, then crossed the island. He purchased 1 ticket from Bastia to Toulon, and by the time he arrived on the French mainland in the morning, he was alone. During those daylight hours on the rugged island, something happened to Alessia and Livia. The key questions remain: where exactly did this occur? How? And was anyone else involved? Over the years, numerous unverified testimonies have emerged, each bringing with it hope, followed by disappointment. Early on, a woman in Propriano reported seeing Matthias with the twins and another woman, suggesting that he may not have harmed them but instead handed them over to someone. In 2013, a lawyer in Sardinia said a client mentioned 2 twin girls resembling Alessia and Livia living in a Roma camp near Oristano and Noro. Police investigated but could not verify the sighting. Other alleged sightings have emerged sporadically, none confirmed through DNA or solid evidence. Authorities in all 3 countries view the case as a probable double homicide by Matthias. Evidence such as his letters, computer searches, missing money, and the lack of confirmed sightings of the twins all suggest this theory. They believe he killed his daughters, most likely in Corsica, and then took his own life. However, the absence of bodies has fueled speculation, particularly from Irina. There's a theory that Matthias's letters were meant to stop the search, and that he gave the twins to someone else who he thought could care for them, possibly in a community shielded from European authorities. Without physical evidence, neither the theory of murder nor the theory of survival can be conclusively proven. The case remains open, and Alessia and Livia are still classified as missing persons. Without their bodies or forensic confirmation, no jurisdiction has officially declared them dead. For Irina, the lack of a trial means she still seeks answers. There has been no closure, no formal acknowledgement of guilt, and no chance to hear a prosecutor present a narrative that could be confronted or challenged. Instead, there are merely files, theories, and the harsh reality of not knowing. Over the years, Irina has channeled her grief into action and founded Missing Children Switzerland, an organization that supports families of missing children and seeks to improve responses to child disappearances. This foundation has been a way to break the silence surrounding her daughter's case, ensuring that children like Alessia and Livia are not forgotten. It serves as a platform to assist other families facing similar tragedies. Age-progressed images of Alessia and Livia have been created, depicting how they might look as teenagers and young adults. Each new image is a painful reminder of the time that has passed while their fate is still unknown. Television documentaries and true crime shows have revisited their case, sparking renewed attention and reports of sightings, most of which lead to dead ends. Throughout this process, Irina has held firm in her belief: until someone provides conclusive proof that her daughters are dead, she will not declare them lost. Without physical evidence, the possibility remains open. Perhaps this is a form of denial, or perhaps it is simply how a mother copes with such uncertainty. It could be both. What is clear is that, for Irina, hope is not a foolish fantasy, but a vital way to cope, a determination not to accept that Alessia and Livia may no longer be alive. As of today, Alessia and Livia would be around 21 years old, entering adulthood. Whether they are alive somewhere in the world or whether their lives ended back in 2011, existing only in memories and photographs, is still an unanswered question. It was an ordinary Saturday morning. The quiet streets were still asleep, untouched by the day's noise. Only a few early risers were heading toward the local diner for their first cup of coffee. The air was cool, peaceful, and still. In the modest Ponderosa apartment complex, 14-year-old Maria woke up with a knot of anxiety tightening in her chest. The night before, her mother, Susan, had gone to visit a friend. She was supposed to come home, but the house felt strangely silent. Maria tried to reassure herself that maybe her mom had stayed overnight or been delayed. But when the clock crept toward 9 o'clock a.m., with no call, no text, and no footsteps at the door, her worry began to sharpen. She got out of bed, walked to her mother's room, hoping Susan had come home late and was still asleep, but the bed was perfectly made. Nothing looked touched. Everything was exactly as it had been before Susan left. Maria grabbed her phone and checked her messages. Nothing. She dialed her mom's number and listened as the rings stretched on until voicemail picked up. Susan Marie, affectionately known as Susie, is a smart, energetic girl who loves being the center of attention. She was born on January 3, 1974, in Montana, the youngest of 6 children of Jack and Marlene Limesand. Despite being the youngest in the family, Susie never let anyone bully her. In the tiny town of Circle, Montana, population around 600, everyone knew the Limesand family. Their father, Jack Limesand, was a deputy sheriff, respected, trusted, widely known, and Susie stood out even among them. She is full of life. As a child, she talked loudly, laughed easily, and threw herself into everything. In high school, she played sports, participated in music, excelled academically, always pushed herself to succeed. She grew up riding horses with her father, mending fences with him and her brothers, hauling hay and manure, doing what others called men's work. She embraced it all without hesitation, yet beneath her bold personality was a deeply loving heart. She cared fiercely for her family, her friends, and later, her children. What made Susie different, though, was her ability to make people feel valued. She could lift someone's spirits just by noticing they were sad, or offer comfort when she sensed someone needed support. She had a natural warmth, a glow that drew people in. Susie wasn't just liked, she was loved. After finishing high school in 1992, Susie moved to Billings, Montana, to attend business college. She had big dreams for her future. After earning a degree in medical transcription, she worked for 5 years at a nursing home. During her college years, she met Walter Marty Larson. Their relationship moved quickly, and before long, Susie discovered she was pregnant. Her family stood by her. In 1993, they married in Circle in a large hometown ceremony. That same year, Susie gave birth to their daughter, Maria, and later, they welcomed a son, Shay. Over time, Susan and Marty's marriage began to crumble. Marty struggled to find steady employment, leaving Susie to work 3 jobs just to support the family while caring for the children. Eventually, the stress became too much for her. The result was painful. Marty packed his belongings and left, without trying to stay in contact with his daughter or son. He even refused to pay child support, leaving Susie to shoulder every burden alone. However, nothing could break a mother who adored her children and was willing to do anything for them. Susie gathered her kids and moved to Glendive, Montana, a town about an hour from where she grew up. She refused to let a failed marriage define her future, decided to rebuild her life from the ground up. She found work at a medical center and quickly bonded with her coworkers. Shortly after relocating, in 1998, Susie met Ted Casey. Ted is 14 years older than her and is a rancher. He also worked part-time as a security guard at Glendive City Hall. His rugged cowboy charm immediately caught Susie's attention. They clicked from the very first day. After several calls and a few dates, the two became inseparable. Ted was stable, dependable, qualities Susie had lacked in her previous relationship. She felt safe with him. Soon, she and her children moved to his ranch, determined to build a new family. They married later that same year, in 1998. Susie's older children began calling Ted Dad, since their biological father had virtually disappeared from their lives. Over the next few years, the family grew. Ted and Susie welcomed two daughters together, Kiana and Charlie. Susie's family approved of her new partner. They believed an older, more experienced man like Ted could offer her the stability she needed. At first, the marriage seemed strong, but cracks slowly began to appear. Ted, who was strict and controlling by nature, wanted complete authority over the free-spirited, social Susie. It began with small restrictions. He didn't want her seeing friends, grew irritated whenever she went out. Then, he began following her. In November 2007, during an argument at a bar, Ted completely lost control. He poured beer over Susie's head and slapped her in front of witnesses. He was arrested that same night, later pleaded guilty to domestic assault. For Susie, this was the final straw. After nearly 10 years of marriage, she walked away. She left the ranch with her children and moved into an apartment at the Ponderosa complex in downtown Glendive, above a row of small retail shops. The area was livelier than the ranch but still held the charm of small-town Montana. Glendive was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, where life moved at a slower, easier pace. Susie was finally adjusting to life without Ted. At 34, she was starting over once again, until the night she vanished. It was Friday, April 11, 2008, and Susie was ready for a fresh start. Newly divorced, she was trying to reclaim her independence after years of a suffocating marriage. That evening, she dropped off her younger daughters, 8-year-old Kiana and 6-year-old Charlie, at their father Ted's house. Then she got dressed up, did her makeup, hair, and headed out to visit a friend. She had no idea this night would be her last. Her two older children, 14-year-old Maria and 12-year-old Shay, stayed home. Susie trusted them completely. They were responsible and mature for their age. She felt confident they would be fine for the evening. Her plans were simple. She was going to spend time with her friend, Linda, who had just finished a round of chemotherapy and wanted to celebrate. But Susie's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. She kept stepping away to take calls, explaining something in a low, tense voice. The caller was Ted Casey. No one knows exactly what he wanted. Perhaps he had questions about the girls, or perhaps he still hadn't accepted the divorce and wanted to know where Susie was. But one thing is certain, Ted was persistent. After a while, Susie left Linda's apartment. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. She never came home. Her eldest daughter, Maria, noticed first. By morning, when Shay walked out of his bedroom and saw his sister pacing nervously around the apartment, he knew something was wrong. Their mother always checked on them every morning, no matter how late she returned. But now, there was only silence. Maria and Shay left voicemail after voicemail, begging their mom to call back. When there was still no answer, they called their grandmother. Within minutes, the entire family was alerted. Susie was missing. Maria was mature, wise beyond her years, and she rarely panicked. So if she was worried, it meant something was seriously wrong. Word of Susie's disappearance quickly reached Valerie, the wife of Susie's older brother Rusty. Because Valerie and Susie were close friends, Valerie immediately sensed danger. Valerie first tried calling, even leaving a voicemail, still hoping Susie would eventually call back, and the whole ordeal would turn out to be a misunderstanding. But the silence on the other end of the line made her stomach twist. By evening, an overwhelming sense of dread had settled in. Unable to sit still, Valerie wanted to retrace Susie's steps from the night before. The first place she drove to was Ted Casey's ranch, Susie's ex-husband. Valerie thought maybe Susie had stopped by late to pick up Kiana and Charlie and perhaps had decided to stay overnight. But as Val headed toward the ranch, darker thoughts crept in. What if Susie and Ted had argued? What if something had gone terribly wrong? The fear hit her so hard that she suddenly turned her car around. If her suspicions were even partially true, going there alone could be dangerous. When she later spoke to her niece, Maria, she learned that Susie had planned to spend the evening with her close friend Linda. After calling Linda, Valerie discovered an unexpected detail. Susie had been excited about a date. She had recently met a man named Brad Holzer, someone she'd known since high school, and they were planning to see each other again that night. Susie had left Linda's apartment around 11 p.m., in high spirits, eager for the evening ahead, but no one in the family had ever heard of Brad. Valerie and Rusty went straight to the police. Normally, when an adult goes missing, authorities hesitate to launch an immediate search. But Glendive was a small town. The officers knew Susie Casey personally. They also knew she had recently separated from a husband with a history of domestic violence, a case that had resulted in Ted receiving a probationary sentence only 6 months earlier. They understood one thing clearly: a devoted mother of 4 does not simply vanish overnight. Investigators started at Susie's apartment. The first thing that struck them was her black car, still parked in the lot. That meant she had returned home at some point and disappeared afterward. She must have planned to go on her date using her own car, so why was it still there? When the officers went upstairs, there were no signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, and no evidence of a break-in. Everything looked like an ordinary home, except for the glaring absence of Susie. Investigators then headed to Brad Holzer's house, the man Susie was supposed to meet. They were surprised when the door opened and another woman appeared. It was Brad's wife. This raised immediate suspicion. A married man with a mistress, and the mistress suddenly vanishes? But their assumptions were premature. Brad and his wife were still legally married, but they were no longer a couple. They lived under the same roof and had agreed they were free to date other people. Brad agreed to come in for questioning right away. He explained that he had driven Susie home himself. He said they had run into each other by chance at a bar about 3 weeks earlier. He remembered feeling a tap on his shoulder and turning to see a smiling Susie, still the same girl he knew when she was 16 and he was 19. Brad described the previous night in detail. He picked Susie up around 11 p.m., just as she returned from Linda's place. They drove to a quiet spot near the river, a place where they could talk in private. They reminisced, shared drinks, kissed. Then, at around 5 a.m., Brad drove her back to the Ponderosa apartments. He parked across the street from the building. They kissed again, said goodbye, and Susie got out of the car. She was wearing a white hoodie, holding a black leather jacket and her bra in one hand. The entrance was only about 20 steps away. Brad watched her walk for a moment, but he didn't see whether she actually made it inside. It was a safe neighborhood, so he drove away. He didn't know that would be the last time anyone ever saw her alive. Brad's wife confirmed that when she returned home from her own date that night, her husband was already asleep. It was around 6 a.m. Still, Brad's story didn't sound entirely convincing. His late-night trip to a secluded spot by the river could have easily been a cover in case someone saw his truck. But Brad himself suspected Ted Casey, Susie's second husband, in her disappearance, and he had a reason. That very morning, April 11, 2008, the day of his date with Susie, Brad received a strange email from a woman named Denise Johnson asking how Brad's wife felt about him dating someone else. Brad believed the message came from Ted, who still seemed unable to accept the breakup. The next step was clear. The authorities had to locate Ted Casey. He picked up the phone immediately, explained that he had left town for a rodeo and wouldn't be back until Monday. Ted insisted he was willing to cooperate fully and would answer any questions. His sudden departure raised suspicion, but investigators couldn't do much until he returned. Detectives went back to Susie's apartment and expanded the search to the area around the building. That's when they found their first real clues. The Ponderosa apartments had an alley on one side and another at the back. Under Susie's window, the dirt was soft, marked with clear footprints. More prints with the same sole pattern appeared near the dumpsters. It looked as though someone had been circling the building, waiting for someone, possibly Susie. Behind the building, in the gravel parking lot, investigators found drag marks, long grooves in the dirt, as if something heavy had been pulled across the ground. Brad had insisted he dropped Susie off across the street and that she was halfway across the road when he drove off. That meant she was close to the entrance, close enough for someone waiting in the shadows to grab her. At this point, detectives faced a grim possibility. They might not be searching for a living woman anymore, but for her body. The evidence strongly pointed to foul play, and one question kept coming up. If Susie had been carrying a jacket and a bra in her hand when she stepped out of Brad's truck, where were those belongings now? By the end of that weekend, the entire town was involved in the search. Volunteers spread out along the interstate between Glendive and Billings, combing through Dawson County on foot, horseback, and ATVs. National Guard helicopters swept the landscape from above. Boats patrolled the Yellowstone River. Meanwhile, Susie's family was barely holding on. Her parents hardly slept or ate. Every minute felt like an eternity. They sat by the phone, hoping for a call that never came. By Monday, April 14th, Susie had been missing for over 48 hours. As promised, Ted Casey showed up at the police station. He told detectives the last time he saw Susie was around 7:00 p.m. on Friday, April 11th. She brought her 2 daughters, Kiana and Charlie, to the house, promised to pick them up the next morning before he started his shift at City Hall at 6:00 a.m. Ted says he, Kiana, and Charlie watched a movie, ate dinner, and went to bed. When Susie didn't arrive the next morning, Ted took the girls to his brother's house before heading to work. His commute passed right by Susie's apartment. After finishing his shift, he left for the rodeo, a trip he claimed had been planned for weeks. He said he didn't begin to worry about Susie until the police called and told him she was missing. When asked about his relationship with Susie and the domestic violence incident from 6 months earlier, Ted admitted that they had fought often. He said Susie liked to go to bars, drink, and stay out late, behavior he strongly disapproved of. One night, after Susie had too much to drink, an argument escalated. Ted claimed he lost his temper, poured a drink over her head to calm her down, and then slapped her. He said it was the first and only time he physically hit her, that he regretted it, but he had already received a year of probation for the assault. Ted firmly denied sending any emails to Susie's new boyfriend, but he did mention receiving a strange phone call from an unknown person who said Brad Holzer was sleeping with his wife, then abruptly hung up. Ted said he immediately called Susie and demanded an explanation. She told him that she had been seeing Brad recently, but insisted it was nothing serious, just flirting, because their divorce had not yet been finalized. At that point, from the investigator's perspective, both men connected to Susie could have been involved in her disappearance. Police simply had no concrete evidence pointing in either direction. One thing was certain: whoever abducted her knew where she lived, knew what time she would arrive home, and intercepted her in those short steps between Brad's truck and her apartment door. Days passed, and Susie's children were left without their mother. The 2 older kids, Maria and Shay, were taken in by Susie's brother Rusty and his wife Valerie, while the 2 younger girls stayed with their biological father, Ted Casey. It was an agonizing time for the entire family. Hoping to uncover new leads, investigators requested Susie's cell phone records. She rarely went anywhere without her phone, so they believed it could be the key to understanding what happened. Once the records came in, detectives found dozens of missed calls from relatives, friends, and co-workers, calls that increased dramatically once people realized she was missing. The sheer number of attempts showed how deeply her loved ones cared and how desperately they hoped she would pick up. But one phone number stood out. There were 29 calls from the same unknown number. What made it unusual was that these calls began on the night of April 11th, before anyone realized Susie had vanished. The phone rang repeatedly during her date with Brad. Susie never answered. From midnight to 5:20 a.m., the caller left more than 20 voicemails. But because Susie disappeared along with her phone, detectives initially had no way of knowing who called or what the messages contained. The breakthrough came when Maria told police she knew her mother's voicemail password. With her help, detectives accessed Susie's messages. The mysterious caller turned out to be a man. His early messages were casual, asking whether she made it safely to her friend's house. But as the hours passed, the voicemails grew increasingly anxious and emotional. The man sounded panicked, almost frantic, as he repeatedly begged her to call him back. Maria instantly recognized the voice. It was her biological father, Walter Marty Larson, Susie's first husband. But why was Marty so frantic about Susie if they had been separated for more than a decade? According to her family, Susie almost never mentioned him. Looking into Marty's past, detectives discovered that he lived in Billings, Montana. In 1998, he had been detained after being spotted wandering outside Ted and Susie Casey's home at around 3:00 a.m. Susie and Ted had reported a suspicious person outside their window. Police arrived and found Marty's car nearby with a rifle inside. Backup units responded. Marty was ultimately charged with stalking and disorderly conduct. A lifetime restraining order was issued, prohibiting him from going near Susie. At the time, Marty had been enraged that Susie left him and started a new life. According to the reports, he tried to intimidate Ted Casey. After that incident, there were no further reports involving Marty. Still, detectives struggled to understand why Marty would try to contact Susie so desperately on the night she disappeared, until the truth came out. When Marty was questioned, investigators asked him directly why he had been trying to reach an ex-wife he hadn't been with in more than 10 years. Marty explained that about a year earlier, his daughter Maria had contacted him through social media. After that, Susie decided it was time for the children to reconnect with their biological father. Gradually, she and Marty resumed communication, not just for the children's sake. According to Marty, their conversations deepened, and eventually, their relationship rekindled into something more. He told investigators that they had fallen in love again. They had talked to each other throughout the year, especially during Susie's separation from Ted. According to Marty, their renewed conversations gave her the courage to finally leave her second husband. They messaged each other almost every day, and the evening of April 11, 2008, was no exception. Marty knew Susie planned to visit a friend that night. He kept reminding her to be careful and urged her not to drink too much or drive while intoxicated. According to Marty, they had an agreement. She would text him once she got home. But after midnight, Susie stopped responding. She wasn't answering messages or picking up the phone. Naturally, Larson became worried. Susie was not only the mother of his 2 children, she was also the woman he hoped to build a future with again. Marty told detectives he kept calling and leaving messages. By 3:00 a.m. Unable to stand the uncertainty any longer, he got into his car and drove to Susie's apartment to check on her. When he saw her car parked outside, Larson assumed she had already returned home. He quietly climbed the stairs and knocked on her apartment door, knowing her bedroom was closest to the entry. When no one answered, he convinced himself she must have had too much to drink and had fallen asleep. Feeling somewhat reassured, he got back in his car and drove toward Billings, stopping at a gas station along the way. What investigators discovered next was unsettling. All 3 men connected to Susie had been near her apartment that same morning. Marty Larson, her first husband, drove there out of concern. Ted Casey, her second husband, passed by on his way to work after dropping their daughters off at his brother's house. Brad Holzer, her high school sweetheart and the man she had been seeing, said he dropped her off around 5:30 a.m. across the street. All 3 were in the area between 3 and 5:30 a.m. Were any of them involved in Susie's disappearance, or were they all simply worried about the woman they cared for? Investigators asked Marty for permission to search his home and vehicle. He agreed without hesitation, even though they didn't yet have a warrant. The first thing detectives noticed was that his car had been thoroughly washed. Marty explained that he had recently struck a deer on the road and had taken the car to a wash afterward. Indeed, officers found small drops of blood on the front bumper. They also discovered a light-colored hair in the vehicle, though it was impossible to determine who it belonged to. With Marty's consent, samples of the blood were collected and sent for testing. Results matched his story. It was animal blood. Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks also confirmed a deer collision had been reported that night. During questioning, Marty remained surprisingly calm, even when detectives tried to provoke an emotional response. When left alone, police cameras recorded him praying softly, whispering, "Where are you, Susie?" It appeared that Marty was more distraught than either Brad or Ted. A search of Larson's apartment uncovered gas station receipts in the trash, confirming his late-night drive, and a curious sheet of paper listing estimates for a Las Vegas wedding. Apparently, Marty had been calculating how much they would need if he and Susie married again. The only other unusual item in the trash was an empty bottle of toilet bowl cleaner. Investigators found it odd that bathroom chemicals were discarded in the kitchen, so they checked the bathrooms. Each toilet looked as though it hadn't been cleaned in a very long time. That raised an unsettling question. If he wasn't cleaning the bathroom, what had the cleaner been used for? Some parts of Marty's story raised suspicions, but overall, his account was supported by physical evidence. Still, detectives remained unsure which of the 3 men, if any, had harmed Susie. There was also the chilling possibility of a 4th person they had yet to uncover. At that stage, police still had no idea what had happened to her. No body, no signs of life, no sign of Susie at all. Then, on April 21, just 2 weeks after Susie vanished, a fisherman walking along the Yellowstone River discovered a badly damaged checkbook lying in the grass. It belonged to Susan Marie Casey. And with that discovery, the investigation escalated dramatically. The Yellowstone River is vast and winding, an unpredictable force carving through Montana, capable of swallowing even the darkest secrets. For 3 weeks, search teams combed the riverbanks and riverbed near Glendive, desperately hoping to find any trace of Susie. Some still clung to the hope that she might be injured but alive. But on May 6, nearly a month after the search began, that hope vanished. That morning, a wildlife researcher took his boat out onto the Yellowstone River to collect water samples for laboratory testing. Instead, he discovered something horrific. Not far from the dock, about 45 kilometers downstream from Glendive, a lifeless body floated in the water. It was Susie. The autopsy revealed that the cause of death was manual strangulation. Her hyoid bone was broken, a classic indicator of being choked with bare hands. There was no water in her lungs, which meant Susie was already dead before her body was dumped into the river. The missing person search instantly shifted into a homicide investigation. Detectives obtained surveillance footage from buildings near Susie's apartment. The video quality was poor, and the images were recorded at night, but even so, analysts confirmed that Brad Holzer had indeed dropped Susie off and then driven away. Shortly afterward, Ted Casey's vehicle was seen heading toward City Hall for his early morning shift. The car drove past the building without stopping. This evidence supported what both men had told investigators. Neither Brad nor Ted appeared to be involved in her disappearance. But Marty Larson had not been completely honest. Footage showed he was still near Susie's apartment when she returned home, meaning he likely witnessed her kissing Brad. Detectives realized that Marty had left apartment only after Brad drove away. This put him exactly where he could have intercepted Susie, dragged her into the alley, and strangled her. Gas station receipts and surveillance footage filled in the remaining gaps. Marty was at a gas station at 8:30 a.m., which gave him more than enough time to dispose of Susie's body. And the location where she was found in the Yellowstone River was directly along the highway Marty would have taken back to Billings. On Sunday, May 11, a memorial service for Susan Casey was held at Zion Lutheran Church. The next day, May 12, she was laid to rest in the cemetery of her hometown. Detectives worked tirelessly, but without solid forensic evidence, they could not file charges. Walter Marty Larson moved to Arizona, and authorities had no legal ground to detain him. A year passed with no answers. Then, tragedy struck Susie's family again. Her brother Rusty, crushed by guilt over being unable to protect her, became obsessed with the idea of getting revenge on Marty. But Rusty was not a violent man. He could not bring himself to follow through. Depression consumed him. He divorced his wife, Valerie, and eventually took his own life. Their devastated parents buried their youngest son beside their youngest daughter. In February 2012, Susan Casey's case was reopened. The new district attorney concluded that the circumstantial evidence was strong enough to pursue charges. Around the same time, newly processed forensic results confirmed that the light-colored hair found in Marty's vehicle years earlier belonged to Susan Casey. With this breakthrough, an arrest warrant was issued. Walter Marty Larson was taken into custody in Arizona in February 2012 and extradited to Montana, where he was charged with deliberate homicide. A search of Marty's laptop revealed yet another disturbing detail. He was the one who sent Ted Casey the anonymous email implying Susie was cheating with Brad Holzer. This proved he knew about Susie's new relationship and was consumed by jealousy, resentment. Susie's oldest daughter, Maria, was supposed to graduate from high school on May 20, 2012. She was devastated that her mother wouldn't be there to see her walk across the stage, but Maria never made it to the ceremony. The night before graduation, she lost control of her vehicle and died at the scene. In her obituary, only Ted Casey was listed as her father, the man who had raised her since she was a child. Marty Larson's trial began in late March 2013. When he walked into the courtroom, gasps filled the room. He had lost nearly 75 pounds. No one knew what caused such drastic and sudden weight loss. The prosecution's theory was clear. When Marty and Susan divorced in 1998, he made it obvious that he didn't want to let her go. Over the years, he continued monitoring her life from a distance, and at one point even confronted her new husband, Ted Casey. In 2007, when Susan separated from Ted, Marty believed it was finally his chance to win her back, but Susan only maintained contact for the sake of their children. Marty hoped for reconciliation. Susan did not. His hopes collapsed the moment he learned about Susan's renewed connection with her former high school classmate, Brad Holzer. Consumed by jealousy, he began sending anonymous messages and hostile emails, trying to sabotage their relationship. Investigators believe that on the night of April 11, 2008, Marty ambushed Susan outside her apartment as she returned from her date with Brad. In a fit of rage, he strangled her, dragged her body to his vehicle, and later dumped her into the Yellowstone River during his drive back toward Billings. He may have believed the river would conceal his crime forever, but it ultimately carried Susan back to the world and exposed what he had done. Walter Marty Larson was sentenced to 100 years in prison for murder plus 10 years for falsifying evidence. However, he will be eligible for parole in 2042, after 30 years, when he will be over 70 years old. Marty never accepted that Susan wanted a life without him. In his distorted mindset, if she couldn't be with him, then no one else deserved to have her. He showed no regard for the children who would grow up without their mother, nor for the unimaginable pain he inflicted on her family. In that moment, the only thing that mattered to him was revenge for the future he believed he'd been denied. He never realized his own future would collapse into the same abyss.